Council Committee on Commerce and Economic Development, and we want to officially call this public hearing to order. The purpose of this public hearing is to hear testimony on resolution number 160042. I would like to recognize that a quorum of the committee members are in attendance, starting from my left, Council members Blondell Reynolds Brown, Alan Dom, Kenyatta Johnson, and David O. And before we begin, for the record, we want to just note that bills number 160678 and 160679 will not be heard in this committee today. Those bills have been referred to the Committee on Law and Government, so we will only be hearing testimony on resolution number 160042. With that in mind, I want to ask the sponsor of the resolution, my colleague, Councilman Johnson, for any opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First and foremost, I want to thank everyone for being here this afternoon, actually, and we're going to get started. I want to start off by talking about the importance of diversity and inclusion as we look at moving the City of Philadelphia forward. As a council person representing the 2nd Councilmanic District, I represent the airport, Navy Yard, as well as more than 15 different diverse neighborhoods throughout the City of Philadelphia. And I often talk about to my constituents how the district in which I represent is the economic engine here for the City of Philadelphia. It's very important and critical to me that if the district that I represent is the economic engine in the City of Philadelphia, the work that we put forward must be diverse and inclusive. And so I want to thank representatives from the Philadelphia Navy Yard, PIDC, Liberty Property Trust, as well as members of the Philadelphia International Airport for being here today, as well as members of the administration, just so we can begin evaluating, building upon, making sure that as we move the City of Philadelphia forward, diversity and inclusion is a part of our #1 agenda. I can also speak for my colleagues who work very tirelessly with me on this issue. We have a commitment as members of council to make sure that all boats are rising as the City of Philadelphia move forward. Often when I'm out and about in the community, we talk about cranes in the sky, and so if there's going to be cranes in the sky and buildings and development taking place, we have a commitment to not only make sure that that process is diverse and inclusive on the building trade side, but most importantly on the professional services side. And so I want to thank all of you for being here, and with that being said, we're going to get started. But I want to briefly look at some numbers as relates to a snapshot of where we're at as a city. From December 2015, the City of Philadelphia has awarded a total of $2 billion of contracts to minority, women, or disabled-owned businesses. From fiscal year 2008 to fiscal year 2015, these minority-owned businesses received $291 million in public works contracts. City departments awarded $201 million in non-federally funded contracts to minority-owned businesses, which represented almost 32% of eligible for-profit contracts for fiscal year 2015. African-American-owned businesses earned $81 million, or 40% of all minority contracting opportunities. White women-owned businesses were awarded $78 million, or 39% of the contract portfolio. Hispanic or Latino American-owned businesses and Asian American-owned businesses each received roughly $20 million, or 10% each of all awarded contracts. Other minority populations combined for a little over 1% of all awarded contracts. As we move forward together as a city, economic development and expansion opportunities should include underrepresented populations in the City of Philadelphia. The reason we are hosting this hearing is to check on the progress of minority and diversity inclusion initiatives at the Philadelphia International Airport and Navy Yard. And I've worked very closely with both entities on this particular topic. And today is just also an opportunity to highlight the progress that we have made, but also build upon that progress as we go into the future. And so with that being said, we want to get the hearing started, and I'll turn things back over to Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Johnson. Any of our other colleagues have any opening comments they would like to make? With that being said, the clerk will now read the title of the resolution being considered today.
Resolution number 160042, a resolution authorizing City Council's Committee on Commerce and Economic Development to hold hearings regarding economic opportunity and diversity participation at the Philadelphia International Airport and the Navy Yard.
The clerk will please call the first panel of witnesses to testify on the resolution.
Harold T. Epps, Iola Harper, and Nolan Atkinson.
Let me just state for the record the rules of engagement for the day with the approval of the resolution's chair, Councilman Johnson. For those of you who have submitted your testimony in advance, we do have a copy of it. If you feel comfortable reading your testimony, please feel free to do so. However, we will not chide any of you who decide that you want to summarize your testimony. I want you to feel free and comfortable to do whatever is best suited for you. We will hear testimony from all members of each of the panel, and we will ask questions after the entire panel has spoken. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Madam Chair, my name is Harold T. Epps. I am the Director of Commerce for the City of Philadelphia. Good afternoon, members of the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. Again, my name is Harold T. Epps, Director of Commerce. It is my pleasure to be here today to provide testimony regarding Resolution number 160042, introduced by Councilman Johnson, authorizing hearings on economic opportunity and diversity participation at the Philadelphia International Airport and the Philadelphia Navy Yard. I am joined today by Nolan Atkinson, Chief Diversity Officer, and Iola Harper, Deputy Commerce Director, Office of Economic Opportunity. The Philadelphia Airport falls under the purview of the Department of Commerce and is a major area of focus. Shirley Cameron, who is a tremendous leader for the airport, is in frequent contact with me about all issues pertaining to the operations and future of our Philadelphia Airport. Likewise, the Philadelphia Navy Yard, run by PIDC, is an important economic engine for the city, and I consider it to be a major priority and directly linked to Commerce's goals of business attraction, retention, and economic inclusion. I am fortunate to have extremely capable partners at the helm of the Navy Yard. John Grady, President of PIDC, and Perma Gupta, Director of the Navy Yard, are here today to offer more details relevant to today's hearing. My close involvement with both the airport and the Philadelphia Navy Yard have made me even more aware of the extent to which both of these facilities can and do play a central role in providing contract and job opportunities for Philadelphia's minority women and disadvantaged community and all of our local residents. I know that I have stated my commitment to diversity before in this room, and I will continue to stress my dedication today and many more times moving forward, because inclusion and participation are of paramount importance to me and to this administration. The Office of Economic Opportunity is one of 3 units within the Department of Commerce. I've given OEO full attention since the first day of this administration, working closely with Angela Dow Burton and now with OEO's recently appointed leader, Ms. Iola Harper, sitting to my right. Since becoming Commerce Director, I have learned a great deal about the OEO operates, and together with its leadership, we have begun developing new strategies to further its mission and ensure even greater opportunities for Philadelphia's minority and women-owned businesses. We will soon be developing a new strategic plan to chart the 3 years ahead. We have been working hard to improve our processes and also have begun a number of new initiatives. Most recently, the mayor wrote to more than 200 developers and major stakeholders in the community, encouraging them to go above and beyond established participation goals. We also have recognized that one of the greatest barriers to inclusion lies in the procurement process, especially in the contract conformance step, and OEO and the Procurement Department are working very closely to make significant improvements. Likewise, in order to ensure that I have a full understanding of the inner workings of OEO, I have become a signatory on all EOPs early on in my administration. But even with the best of processes, we will never have the participation that I know everyone in this room would like to see without ensuring that our minority and women-owned businesses have the capacity to take on the work. Winning large contracts and doing business with the city or with major stakeholders requires having honed business management skills, strong finances, access to capital, bonding, and adequate staffing. Without these attributes, the most committed business owner may still face challenges and even failure if awarded a contract. And because we want the opportunities offered by the airport, the Navy Yard, and others to be a launching pad for our MWDSB community, we are committed to connecting emerging businesses to technical assistance, financing, bonding, mentor protege programs, and whatever else is necessary to poise them for growth. Following this panel, you will hear directly from the leadership of the airport and PIDC. I am confident that they will be able to address any specific questions or concerns that you may have. I want to close by acknowledging City Council for continuing to push for more diversity and more inclusion in city opportunities. This has been a long-standing dialogue between our branches, not merely the people in this room today, and it has not always been an easy one. I cannot speak to the past, but I want to reiterate today that this is a shared commitment and we welcome and rely on a partnership with City Council. Thank you for the opportunity.
No testimony, we're just here for questions.
We have three of you sort of listed on the
Yes.
panel, so I wasn't sure if the three of you were going to give individual testimony.
Good afternoon, members of council and Madam Chair. I am Nolan Atkinson, City's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. I have submitted written testimony. I am here to answer any questions which you may have.
Since we will have no further testimony from this panel, we sort of want to open it up for questions now. We'll start with Councilman Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, all three of you, for submitting your testimony on this particular topic. I want to go back to the statement regarding, and this is for Mr. Epps. How you doing today?
Wonderful, thank you.
I'm doing pretty good, can't complain. I just want to go back over just a couple of the statements. One, regarding the outreach to over 200 developers and major stakeholders, encouraging them to go above and beyond established participation goals. So give me an idea of what that looked like. So a letter just went out, what's the follow-up, who responded, and where does that fit into the grand scheme of the administration moving forward, specifically focusing on diversity and inclusion goals? That's the first part. And then then the second part of your testimony talked about the problems that arise with the procurement of contracts, but it follows up and says, we are committed to connecting emerging businesses to technical assistance, financing, bonding, mentor protege programs, and whatever else is necessary to pose them for growth. And just give me an overview. I know both of the two agencies who are here will elaborate on it, but just give me an overview as being the head of those two departments.
Thank you for your question, Councilman. So coming on the heels of midweek, we decided last spring, we just wanted to figure out the right time to have the mayor and our offices reinforce and reiterate that this administration was fully dedicated and committed to raising and continuing to see growth in our minority and women-owned spending levels, particularly on the professional services side, as you articulated. One of the things we learned very on in this administration is we put a lot of emphasis on the construction side, and too often we kind of let the front end of development processes go by without putting scrutiny and expectations around the issue of diversity and inclusion. And so we drafted a letter to reiterate to all stakeholders, both public and private sector, that this would be something that we would continue to address. And the way we will follow up on is all of them have to have an EOP. And the office that Ms. Harper leads will ensure that we continue to challenge, raise the level of participation. And again, I want to continue to stress, particularly on the professional services side. We know from the disparity study that we've got great capacity. And again, history shows that we spend a lot of time on the construction side and forego opportunity on the front end. And this letter was to reiterate that we will raise our level of expectation and visibility on that. Now, the second question is, and again, Ms. Harper is coming from the Enterprise Center. She saw this in her last role, that we need more capacity, we need more scale of our minority and women-owned companies. And in order to do that, we have to make sure, if you will, that they're ready for prime time. And so our office, along with others in Enterprise Center, is one of those places that we want to be intentional and aggressive and progressive about making sure that companies have all the technical assistance, all the financing support, and any other tool that they will need to grow from one level to the next level. Because if you think about the billions of dollars that will be spent in this city, and we're very fortunate to already see where our next 5 to 7 to 10 year plan will take us, we've got to make sure our companies are ready. And we have learned from years of doing this work that some will need additional support to climb the hill of capacity and capability.
Okay, thank you. This question, next question is for Mr. Atkinson as well as Ms. Harper, and I want to get some clarity on the two. So, Ms. Harper, welcome.
Thank you.
In your new position, and state for the record your name and exact description of your title.
Sure. Iola Harper, Deputy Commerce Director, Office of Economic Opportunity.
And Dr. Nolan Atkinson, state for the record your name and the exact title of your position.
My name is Nolan Atkinson.
And that's for the record.
Nolan Atkinson. I am the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer housed in the Office of the Mayor.
Okay. So, because I want to make sure there's not an overlap, but for both of you, I just want to get an idea on where we're at in terms of, both of you are taking on 2 new positions. Where are we in terms of the administration, diversity, and inclusion? 2, is there a strategic plan that comes out of your office, Mr. Nolan Atkinson, that specifically crafts or works in partnership with the airport as well as the work that's taking place in the Navy Yard?
Yes, sir. OEO reports directly to the Commerce Department and Director Harold Epps. Okay. And on all matters of direct day-to-day activity reports to Mr. Epps. My responsibility is to do an overview, to take a long view as to the planning and performance of the Office of Economic Opportunity and to make recommendations.
Okay. So thus far, since your arrival in the new administration, where are we in terms of the overall big picture strategic plan for the city of Philadelphia through your office?
With regard to a big picture plan, we're currently, Ms. Harper has only been with OEO for about 6 weeks, and where we are...
I was referring more to your office. I'm going to come back to Ms. Harper.
Okay.
And what she's doing, because I know she just took over from Ms. Angela Burton Dow, so I think she's probably still, getting adjusted to that position. But I'm speaking more so for the newly created position that the mayor just created, which is your commission, Office of Diversity and Inclusion.
Yes, sir. And your question is with regard to...
Where are we with the strategic plan for the city of Philadelphia that's listed in your testimony?
As listed in my testimony, that strategic plan refers to the City of Philadelphia workforce.
Workforce, yes.
And where we are is on 2 levels. If you examine the exempt workforce and reviewing the metrics, we made a commitment that we were going to develop a transparent report and make it available to the public in the first year of the administration. We're close to being on that target, and not there yet, yet, but I would say hopefully in the month of January at the latest, we will have information on exempt workforce. With respect to the civil service workforce, that is something which we did not get into this year because of the Pew Foundation's examination of other cities and other practices, and they're going to give us a report in the spring of 2017. So we have not done anything with regard to the civil service workforce except monitor the Pew Foundation's activities so that we have some awareness of what they're doing.
And specifically because we're talking about diversity and inclusion, and your strategic plan revolves around workforce, does this deals with executive level all the way down to basic service-related workers as well?
The strategic plan that we're going to do this year is going to be the exempt workforce beginning at the executive level.
At
Yes,
the
sir.
executive level?
That is correct, sir.
So that would be making sure that on the executive level of all city agencies, right, we're talking about airport, Navy Yard, streets, Parks and Rec, we will be making sure that that workforce will be diverse and inclusive from top to bottom, just to make sure I'm clear.
Well, I want to, if I could say, I think what we're doing and what our goal is the first year is we're taking a snapshot of what is there,
Yeah.
which we will give information about, and we will then be able to make a report to the citizens of Philadelphia as to where we are with the diversity of the workforce, and we will then be able to make strategic plans. In the meantime, however, we have been doing diversity and inclusion training in all city departments, most city departments, not all, but most city departments, and to date, I believe that consists of 22 or 23 departments to date.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Naxton. And I'm just going to finish with Ms. Harper. So, Ms. Harper, I know you're new to your position and making a transition from one administration to a new administration. Can you give us an overview of currently your plans in your new position, specifically as it relates to your goals, as relates to your position, diversity and inclusion, but as relates to the Philadelphia Navy Yard and the airport, your interaction with them, how do you go about establishing, working in partnership with Commerce Director Harold Epps to make sure we're reaching the goals that we want to reach in both of those two city agencies?
Absolutely. So first, in terms of where we are, most of you should have received a draft summary of FY16 outcomes for our office. Our plan is to produce the full report, and that full report will also include some pages that outline our strategic direction going forward. So in the summary that I share with all of you, it does offer a few bulleted points of the things that we're looking at strategically. And that those were arrived at based on conversations with many of you, conversations with many of the folks that are sitting in the audience today. We have an advisory council that we've met with, and so a lot of the time that I have been on board has been spent talking to people and trying to get a handle on really what is important to them in terms of OEO, how we can position this agency to be useful to not only the administration, but more importantly to the businesses and the taxpayers that we serve. How can we position this agency to push the needle on inclusion? And so some of the things that we're looking at going forward, obviously, our growth of the registry. Right now, we want to get the registry filled with more businesses that are from the Philadelphia area, so targeted growth of the OEO registry. We're looking at exploring the few and no exemptions that I know trouble a number of people. Business owners and council folks alike really have questions about the few and no and the exemptions and what that means. And so we're looking at exploring that. We have already had conversations about partnering on a bonding and education program for a lot of the businesses that we work with. And clearly, we're looking at capacity building. And so I've had conversations with probably every nonprofit economic development organization to look at how OEO can work more closely and have a reciprocal relationship with the companies that we work with. Many of them need capital, but honestly, many of them also need access and opportunity. And so how do we position, as Harold Epps talked about earlier, how do we position them to scale and grow so that they can take advantage of the opportunities that not only the city has to offer, but that our quasis have to offer, that our universities and hospitals have to offer, so on and so forth. And then finally, we're looking at increased communication from our office. One of the things that I've heard from many of the firms that we serve is they don't hear from us enough. They're not getting enough information. They're finding out information too late. And so we're looking at how do we effectively communicate information and opportunities not only to the businesses that we serve, but also to the body of the city council as well. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. Certainly, if there are other things that we need to look at, I haven't had a chance to meet with each of you yet, but I believe I am at least on all of your calendars at this point. I am happy to entertain any other thoughts. So that's what we're looking at going forward. You've received a summary. You will receive a full report from our office on January 16th that will include that information, more detail on that information. In terms of how we work with the airport and Navy Yard, I have had an opportunity to actually visit the airport and have detailed discussions on their DBE program, how their DBE program works in conjunction with our program. And so at this point, what I can say is that I have clarity on how it works, but I don't know specifically right now if there's a plan. There isn't a plan in terms of doing anything specific going forward, but we do have a very good working relationship. We do have very clear communication between our agencies. I have not yet had an opportunity to talk with folks at PIDC other than anecdotally. And so it is my plan to go out and have conversations with them to look at how OEO can, operate effectively and usefully in that arena as well.
Who will be responsible for enforcement on the OEO side, or for the city of Philadelphia as a whole in partnership with your office, to make sure that if a person comes and say, I'm contracting with XYZ company as a sub, and we want to make sure that if the person receives the city of Philadelphia, a contract from the city of Philadelphia, that they're following through, reaching their goals. We know that for a fact that who they partner with is who they say they partner with,
yes,
right, in order for them to get the contract. And the second part of that question is, separate from the enforcement, what's our participation goals for the city as a whole? Where are we in terms of achieving that goal, but what's the actual dollar value? Because a lot of times companies will say, well, the goal was 35%, we hit 34%, but then when I look at how much the company that they partner with actually received in terms of dollars and cents, may be totally different from them actually saying, well, I reached my goal in terms of participating.
Absolutely. So I can say for FY16, we were at 30.65%.
Say it again, please.
30.65%. The goal that's been established,
Representing 380.
representing $318 million.
318 million?
Yes. I can share that, our mayor has established a goal of 35%.
35?
Yes.
Okay.
And, we are looking at every possible way over the next 5 years to get from 30.65% to 35%.
Let me just clarify that the past administration, the goal was 30%.
30?
Yes.
Okay, y'all want 35?
And under this administration, we agreed to raise it aspirationally over the 4-year period to 35%. And so for year one, we're 30.65. The numbers went from 302 million last year to 318 million. I always say
That's the increase in 118?
the increase is $16 million. I always say you can't spend a percent. So it's only the dollars, and the dollars went from 302 million to 318 million dollars. Let me also say that the Office of OEO is working proactively and intentionally with the Procurement Office to make sure that we have better communication to get higher levels of response in those categories where we were not getting a number of responses. So we know by category how many responses we get to RFPs. In some categories, we're not satisfied with those levels, and so there's aggression around focusing in on those areas and getting more responses.
Being proactive around.
Number two, I believe it's been passed, somebody will help me, I know we had intent to pass, I think you all did improve the legislation around best value. Is that correct? Was that approved?
I know there's scheduled for tomorrow, I believe.
Okay, so maybe it's not approved, but anyway, the best value will also give us many more levers to pull to make sure that we're getting contracts into the right hands and not just on lowest cost, which also would improve the level of participation of Philadelphia-based companies and also minority and women-owned companies.
Okay. And I'm going to wrap up because I see my colleague down there has a light on, Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds-Brown. But just the last question of Ms. Harper. I know that under the last administration, there was a process in which on certain development projects that would go through City Council and receive City Council support, has the EOP plan. Angela would meet, or her team would meet with that particular developer. I think it's once a month or every other month. My council staff would be in there. I know we did it for Xfinity Live. So Angela would come. There was a minority consultant on the team as well. And we would meet once a month to go over, is Xfinity Live in South Philadelphia reaching their goals?
Yes.
Who are they contracting with? Isn't there any problems on the sites in terms of the building trades, hiring people? How is that process working? Under this administration, are you still taking on that same model? And if so, on how many projects does your office actually go out and actually participate in terms of making sure people are held accountable and reaching their goals?
Sure. So that's called the oversight process with our EOPs. That process has continued and will continue. I found that it is an extremely helpful process in terms of really being clear about a project, what stage it's in, what's going on, and the possibilities of any type of remedial action that may need to happen. So they will continue. Typically, an oversight committee is pulled together when a project owner requests, or if the project is over, I believe, $50 million is the trigger right now. So
is there a process for the airport now? Is there an oversight process with the airport, working in partnership with them? From your office?
Sure. So our office is involved if there are city dollars involved. If it is a federal project, we, obviously are able to communicate and share, our thoughts with the airport, but we are not necessarily involved in goal setting for projects that do not have city dollars involved.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Johnson. Let me just acknowledge the presence of Councilwoman Janie Blackwell, who is seated to my left. And before we call on Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds-Brown, Councilman Johnson, I just want to quickly follow up on your last comment. And while I know the resolution that we are discussing at hand is particularly related to Navy Yard along with the airport, but I'm looking at this summary, Ms. Harper, that you provided to council with a specific eye at the personal and professional services, and this is on page 5 of your summary. And you note that personal and professional services represents 54% of our spending. Now, with that in mind, this is from the city's perspective. I was encouraged to sort of take a stroll through our EOP legislation championed by former Councilman Wilson Good, now one of our senior advisors. And I have to ask you all for the record, because I've gotten 5 answers from 5 different people when I've asked this question. One of, when you define when an EOP must be submitted, it says that now this is, I'm looking at Chapter 17, 1600, and this is Section 17, 1601, which includes the definitions. You know, we were originally at 250, the leadership of our council president, that number was reduced to 100,000. And it says, at D and E, a development project or contract that requires an ordinance of council in order to proceed, or a development project or contract other than one for development exclusively of a single-family home that requires a resolution of council in order to proceed. But this next one is the one that is really the rub for me. A development project or contract that requires an action of the Zoning Board of Adjustment pursuant to Section 14-303, 7 or 8, other than a project or contract for the development of an exclusively one single-family home. So my interpretation of that, now, and I, you know, again, I know this is about those two regions in particular, but when I look at this, and I'm looking at this 54% number, this is just personal and professional services here in the city, but when I think about the opportunities that are being left on the table in accordance to what is presented as it relates to this zoning board of adjustment language, that says to me that any project that is going before the zoning board of adjustment, that aside from a one single family home, if it requires zoning board action, that an EOP plan is required. And so I want to get a sense from you. Are we interpreting that language correctly? Should it be any project that's going before the zoning board that meets all the requirements set forth in the EOP legislation? It should have EOP with it? Because when I've talked to attorneys, I've had several to tell me, yes, you're absolutely right. If a project if it's over 100,000 and it requires action of the zoning board, they should submit an EOP plan. If that is the truth, have we been requiring that, and who's monitoring it?
So I don't know if we have been requiring it. That is how I interpret the legislation. So what I can do is look at what's been happening, and I can report back to the body.
Okay, I would appreciate that and a response as soon as possible, because if that is the case and you and I are interpreting the language that is written in the EOP legislation exactly the same, and we have not been monitoring whether or not any project valued over $100,000, aside from an individual single-family home that is requiring action from the zoning board, is supposed to have an EOP submitted, and we have not. I'm just looking at your 54% as it relates to city spending for personal and professional services, and think how many opportunities for minorities, women, and disadvantaged businesses we as a city have been leaving off the table because we haven't been following through.
Absolutely. I will follow up, and I will provide the information. I do want to offer a point of clarity, though, that not every EOP has an oversight committee. So what I will also look at is the number of active oversight committees, and I can share that with you as well.
Thank you. Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Thank you. Good morning. All of my questions are scattered based on a number of responses that you've offered. So let me follow up with my most recent, your most recent statement. You said that not all EOPs have oversight committees. So what's the trigger? What determines who should be subject to an oversight committee?
So right now, it's my understanding that a project that is valued at $50 million, or when the project owner requests an oversight committee, those are the two triggers presently that put an EOP committee into place.
Okay. You also mentioned that where there are no city dollars, the city's reach is limited, and phrased differently, with federal contracts, the city has no reach. Is that fair to say?
It's not exactly what I said, but yes, that is in the spirit of what I said. We have the ability to communicate, and Kathy and I have conversations in terms of, projects that are going on at the airport, but we do not have goal-setting authority over any project that does not have city dollars. We do not have, right, yes, in terms of the airport relationship.
So when it comes to MBE, WBE, goals, expectations of
They are set by
the mayor and this body on federal dollars, we have no say.
It's set by the airport, and their goals and guidelines are set by the federal government. So they can, when their panel comes up, they will offer some additional feedback. So it's not that there are no goals, it's just that the goals are set by the federal government, and they're set, the process of goal setting is done by the airport.
So, Councilwoman, one of the places of connectivity is through my office, where the airport reports to. The CEO has an advisory committee, which I am on, and it has a diversity and inclusion subcommittee, which I chair. And so, though there is a different set of federal guidelines, we work collaboratively to make sure that the intent of and desires of the administration are implemented to the best we can. But we are, by law, they are imposed by the federal government and not by the city.
So have you seen an experience where the expectations of the administration and council are not aligned with the expectations of the feds around MBE, WBE activity?
To be honest, the answer is yes. Yes. Okay. The federal government's expectations are not as high as ours. And so there is work that we have to do.
Where's the Greater Philadelphia Chamber in this conversation and debate and ongoing effort for equity?
You happen to be looking at two past members of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee at the Chamber. That's Mr. Atkinson and myself. We continue as ex officio members of that body. We were just at a meeting 2 weeks ago, and we were there for the purpose of making sure that the Chamber continued to be intentional about its agenda as it relates to diversity and inclusion. And again, I would say we've got work to do.
So intentional means what? Is there a committee at the Chamber that focuses on this like a laser beam, and then maybe looks to see corporate leaders who get it and do it in a really great way?
There was a whole bunch there, but yes, there is a committee, and I am not going to say that all the corporate leaders get it in a great way. I would just say that we've set some expectations, and there's more work to do to get the kind of full alignment and participation we'd like to have.
So are there any stars there that could lead by example, or have demonstrated that they get it, believe it, practice it, and lead by example?
Yes, there are some.
Okay, so we'll do a separate follow-up on that
Yes.
later. Because
I would refrain from giving you some because I would leave out others.
Sure.
But yes, there are definitely some.
Okay. The diversity inclusion training, how old is that practice? Somewhere in either the testimony or your statement, there's the mention of what is now appears to be new diversity inclusion training for across departments.
That's new. That started with me, I believe.
Okay, and we can look for the yield or the findings in the pending report.
I'll certainly report on every department that I met with, and it's a 90-minute training session.
It's a what?
A 90-minute training session with the executive leadership of departments.
Okay. In another hearing, I requested a breakdown by department of the OEO officers affiliated or associated with the 25 departments across government. And I keep this as a tool for hearings like now. So there are 4 OEO officers responsible for 25 departments based on 2015 report. Is that still the same?
We are gathering all of the data now. Some names have changed, and so that will be part of our January report. But I don't believe that there are any substantive changes from FY15 in terms of the ratio of OEO officers that are represented on the OEO officers list that you have.
So given that the mission of, part of the mission of this hearing is to gather some assurance that the needle is moving, particularly at the airport and PIDC, operationally, what are you doing differently with regards to those professionals to send this message that council and the mayor, as he has articulated, is serious about this issue?
So the first OEO officers meeting that I will preside over will happen in the month of December. And Nolan Atkinson has been invited to that meeting to begin to have the conversations about diversity and inclusion. But we will...
Will there be regular meetings?
Yes, they are. We meet bi-monthly with the OEO officers.
Okay.
So there is opportunity for ample interaction with the officers from each department.
So, Councilwoman?
Please.
Yes, I think one of the things around behavior that I was impressed with was during midweek, there were, I don't know how many events around town, but one of the ones that I was, how many, 40?
40 events.
One of the ones I was most impressed with was the forum held at the airport on Friday. It must have been 400 or 500 people in the room, and there were breakout groups that really talked about how you do business with the airport across all dimensions. Shelley and her team can report in more detail than I can, but I think it did go a long way to be aligned with the spirit, and what we've got to do now is make sure that we can get aligned around the numbers.
So that goes to my favorite expression. You listen to what people say, but then you watch what they do. And it's always in the numbers and the reports that yield what's real and what's not.
That's correct.
How's the airport, and maybe this question may be more appropriate for the airport, so is it fair to say that the leadership at the Department of Commerce, the CEO at the airport, and the CEO at PIDC are peers? Because I'm trying to get a handle on where does the buck stop when it comes to meeting goals at PIDC and the airport?
Well, clearly, the airport ends up, the buck stops in my office.
Okay.
Okay? PID is a separate agency, and the buck stops with the CEO, but I'm also on the PIDC board, as is Councilman Johnson and Blackwell, and so we have accountability to ensure that PIDC is doing what it needs to do. But let me also stress, and Mr. Grady will talk about it differently, the Navy Yard is a population of a lot of private entities, and there is no such thing as a Navy Yard agency that has oversight and responsibility for all of the activities at the Navy Yard. So that's a very complex institution, or plot of land. But as it relates, and there are people here from Liberty Property Trust and others that can speak to that.
Sure.
But I can say that all the leaders involved, we are all on the same page about where we want to go. The question is, how fast will we get there?
Okay. What are the limitations or differences that exist for projects that are not MBE, WBE, but the owner is a minority? So prime projects. Is there any monitoring, if you will, of prime projects where the owner is a female or a minority, but it's not MBE, WBE?
That's all. Well, and I'm going to let Ms. Harper say it, but if I understand your question right, that's an oxymoron. Because if they do business with the city and they are minority or woman, they must be certified. And so by default,
that's item A.
That's automatic. By default, that makes them an MWBE.
Forgive me?
That makes them an MWBE.
So I'm not making myself clear. Those who become so successful that they no longer meet the
in the city, in the way the city certifies through NMSDC, there's no such thing as getting too big. It's only in the federal contracting where you can outgrow their certification. But in the way the city, the state, and the private sector, there's no such thing as getting too big. That is one of the reasons we advocate for that form of certification. If you choose to certify as a minority or women-owned company, you can be whatever you want to be in size or scale. With the federal government, they have employment levels and revenue levels where you can outgrow. Having run a minority-owned company, I have a problem with that system, but we're not here to debate that. But in our system, there's no such thing as outgrowing it. You can be 2 billion, 5 billion, 10 billion, you can still be certified as a minority and woman-owned company.
Very helpful.
Now, let me just, one of the things I think we need to make sure is when we contract with a minority-owned vendor at the prime level, we need to make sure that they are doing what they need to do with their tier twos. And I'm not convinced that we do all that work very well.
Right.
We need to do a better job of that.
A better job of complete the sentence.
When the tier one is a minority or women-owned company, we need to do a better job of making sure that they, at their tier two, are contracting with the same spirit.
Okay. All right. So speak, if you can, to the new relationship with the Enterprise Center.
I don't know that there's a new relationship. I think because I've come from there and because I'm very familiar with the programs, but I'm familiar with the programs for many of the nonprofit agencies. So I wouldn't say it's a new relationship, as much as I would say that I just have a very clear idea of the technical assistance and the resources that are available throughout all of the agencies and institutions in the city, and we're really looking at how to create an ecosystem that supports the businesses that OEO serves, from a technical assistance and from a capacity building perspective, which I don't know, that we've concentrated too much on as an entity in the past. So
Okay.
Within Commerce, we have a number of partners that we facilitate to achieve our goals and objectives. And there are a number of them. And that's within the Office of Business Services, our Neighborhood and Corridor Development, and OEO.
Okay.
And one of those that we would consider a Tier 1 partner would be the Enterprise Center. It's one of many.
So let me close where I started. And is it too premature right now to assess how well the OEO officers are doing, since you haven't had a chance to meet with them all yet? Ms.
I'm
Harper?
happy to report out after my first meeting.
Okay. All right, then. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chair recognizes Councilman Donovan. Councilman, we know you have a long-standing commitment on the schedule, so thank you for your patience in staying this long.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I unfortunately have to leave, but I wanted to just, wanted to first welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. And I don't have a question, I just have a thought. I think it's part of my responsibility to come up with some crazy ideas, so I'm going to throw it out there to everybody. But I'm hearing all the conversations, and I'm going to give the context of this is Cristo Rey, the high school called Cristo Rey. Most of you know about Cristo Rey. Cristo Rey is a school at 5200 North Broad. They're moving to 17th and Allegheny. I think it's 360 students or so. All the children in that school are in poverty. I think a family of four can't make more than $35,000 a year. And I think last year they graduated 92% of their kids, which is amazing. And here's the key. Every student from 9th to 12th grade works 1 day a week in a job. So let me now dial it down. That's a great system that's working phenomenally. I think 100% of the kids went on to college, by the way. Can you imagine that? Unbelievable. We should copy that in the public school system. We should require the public schools to have these kids working 1 day a week for free in a job from 9th to 12th grade. Now let me take it down to the Navy Yard. We should consider building a Navy Yard high school for technology, where kids come to this high school, they work 1 day a week in the jobs in the Navy Yard and in the airport. You could train them for both. They have 1 day a week from 9th to 12th grade, and all of a sudden, instead of us having to require diversity, it'll happen automatically, because you'll have kids there that are trained and they'll want those jobs. So just a thought, I'll leave it with you. Go ahead.
Councilman, you would be happy to hear that the subcommittee I chair also has community engagement on it, and probably 80% of that conversation was had in my office about 2 weeks ago.
I am happy to hear that, because I think that's the long-term solution. Because we have, what, 400,000 people in poverty in this city, and we have a drop, I think a high school graduation rate of 62% in the public schools. We need to connect, in general, business with schools. And the Navy Yard, by the way, the airport could be the model of doing that. If you would build a high school down there, it would be unbelievable.
Absolutely. And along the way, we must raise the level of the competency of the people graduating from high school in their reading and math, in their math skills. And they will get a lot of that if they can see, touch, and feel at a much earlier age.
You could have people in these companies actually be guest lecturers in the classes for these kids. It'd be we would be a model. And by the way, I just want to say something about the Navy Yard. I'm a big fan of the Navy Yard. The 1990s, shuttered. Today, booming, and I think ULI, was it March or April, Urban Land Institute, recognized the Navy Yard as #1 adaptive reuse in the United States. It's amazing we have it here.
I just saw Councilman Tautenberger come in. We were in Germany 2 months ago. He was one place, I was another, and the first question I got asked was, how's your Navy Yard doing? So the model is, it's not only recognized in the United States, it's recognized around the globe.
That's great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman Dom. Let me acknowledge the presence of Councilman Al Taubenberger. Thank you for being here, and the chair recognizes Councilman O.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm sorry, I might have misheard this, so I just wanted to double check. It was in relation to Councilman Blondell Reynolds Brown's question. I thought her question was in relation to minority or women-owned businesses that are not certified as minority-owned businesses. And I thought your answer, which I might be completely mistaken, was that they would be certified. So, am I confused? I might have just missed something there.
No, what I thought I heard her say was doing business with the city, and the response was, if you do business with the city, you must be certified. So if you need help in getting certified, we can help you do that in 30 days or less. But the minute a criteria to do business with the city as a minority or woman-owned is you have to be certified.
So a business that is minority-owned cannot do business with the city unless they're certified?
That is, we will get them certified. That's correct.
Okay. How long has that been going on? For a long time, I suppose?
I can't say, but for a very long time.
We want to make sure that there's a process to make sure that you are ready to do business with the city, and the certification process is a part of it.
And it's also to ensure that the ownership of the business is actually woman or minority owned.
Oh, I'm being corrected. They can do business with the city, it just doesn't account toward participation.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you very much. I was confused. All right, thank you.
Well, just
You can't have,
that's just for the benefit, because we are here and we get it, but there is someone who is watching today or will be watching this hearing at another time. Go back for the record and state the issue or the question at hand, and then give your response to it, if you will.
so we encourage minority and women-owned businesses to be certified so we can count those dollars against the very thing that we're being questioned about. But if you choose to, as a minority or woman-owned company, do business, and you're so fortunate enough to get a contract, that's fine, you can get that contract, but it will not be counted as part of the numbers in which we are challenged to meet. So we go out of our way to encourage those companies to become certified. And
All right, thank you very much. I'll just put that within context of why I asked the question, because once upon a time as a law office, I answered an RFP from one of our city entities, not an authority, and it didn't say apply as a minority, and I did not. And I was selected as one of the providers, and years later, I went back to ask, why do I get so little work year after year? They checked it out and they said, because you're a minority certified business and you're limited to 8 cases a year, which I was surprised to hear that. And so I'm not saying there's a disadvantage. I'm just saying some people choose not to apply and be certified because they feel that they are subject to limitations that are disadvantageous for competitive businesses. I certainly hope that's not the case with the city, but certainly was my experience, and I've been aware of that ever since. Thank you.
Yeah, that's we could go back and forth. I think the issue is when we get asked what the dollar spending was in percent or dollars, we're measuring it against those that are certified. And so we do not account for those that would fall into probably that double minority group, and that is ones who have gotten a contract and chosen not to be certified.
Thank you.
Councilman Johnson?
Yeah. Ms. Harper, I just want to go back as I wrap up my questions for this panel. So, projects above 50 million in the city funding, projects above 50 million with city funding requires an oversight committee.
That have an EOP.
That has an EOP.
Yes.
And what happens to projects underneath that 50 million, right?
Right.
And the city funding, who tracks and how does that fit into this in terms of having an EOP plan? Because 50 million for some is okay.
Correct. I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, if you can just look into it.
There's an EOP plan for it. It just doesn't have an oversight committee.
It doesn't have an
Does it have
oversight, but you're
oversight
asking who kind of monitors that EOP. That is what I have to find out, and I will let you know. Because I'm not sure who monitors EOPs for under the triggers that fall under the triggers that we talked about.
So if you can do me a favor, and I'm working with you because I know you're just getting started and transitioning from one administration to another administration. I'm quite sure that this administration has their own vision of how they want to take the city in terms of diversity and inclusion. If you can get back with me with that information, and also the comment that in the statement that Madam Chair talked about, Parker, regarding the EOP programs required for zoning.
Yes.
We do zoning variances just about every day, and I'm quite sure when I go out throughout at least the second councilmatic district and I see development taking place, unless for the major ones that I have worked on with PIDC, such as Lincoln Square and the Hyatt Hotel that's coming through, other projects. See, we're getting information that all all development projects require EOP. And
Right.
and so I want to get some clarity on that. Because from my understanding, Council President Clark had put some legislation out some time ago requiring all development projects to have an EOP. And so we just want to have some clarity, at least moving forward, so we can make sure that we're pushing participation on all levels. That's all I have, and I thank you for
I will.
testimony. Go ahead, sir.
So Councilman Johnson, this is after the fact, but one of the other ways we do get summary data is in the annual audit. The annual audit will tell all of us the level of compliance against the awards from the previous year. If I remember correctly, last year's number was 90 or 91%. Okay, but we still owe you the answer on a real-time basis. That only tells us
On an
after
ongoing
the fact.
basis.
Now, I was trying to wrap up, right, but I have one more question, right? Because we're going through this now as we look at rebuild, right? We just had a procurement hearing sponsored by my colleague, Councilwoman Sanchez, right? Who's responsible for doing the big picture enforcement? In other words, they can say, here's several billion coming under water, capital projects, here's money coming from under the airport, here's money coming from Parks and Rec, all capital projects, development projects as a whole, and say, here's how much we're accomplishing from a diversity and inclusion perspective, from a dollar and figures amount across all of our departments as a whole. Who would be responsible?
If you take the airport out directly, we are.
Okay. All right. Just want to get some clarity on that. All right.
If you say the airport, we are.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Councilwoman Reynolds Brown?
so let's underscore that. Any and all efforts around rebuild, project management, and everything else in between, ultimately, those lines lead to the two of you.
Well,
With regards to
quite.
what we care about, this MBE, WBE, access, awareness, information, et cetera.
So Mr. Atkinson and I and Ms. Harper are part of the administration's committee, but we have a rebuild office that will have day-to-day responsibility, but we will also be a part of the
Yes.
affirmation and insurance process.
Okay. And you may not be aware of the fact that there is, I don't think I'm premature, well, if that city council ultimately renders decisions around how that rebuild rollout is going to happen in the councilmatic districts, not an external third-party committee outside of government, but members of council. Are you aware of that sentiment?
I will not respond to that because I'm not fully apprised of its circumstance.
Okay. All right then. Thank you. Thank you,
Even
Madam
though
Chair.
he's not fully apprised of it, I just want to thank you for acknowledging that and putting that on the record as a very gentle reminder, Councilwoman Reynolds Brown. Let me thank all three of you so very much. Tough issues, but if you can, please stick around just in case issues regarding your respective roles come back up, but we want to thank you so very much for your patience.
Pleasure.
The clerk will please call the second panel of witnesses to testify on the resolution.
Shelley Cameron, Folasade Olanipekun Lewis, and Kathleen Padilla.
Want to say good afternoon to each of you and thank each of you so very much for the record. Councilman Johnson, I want you to notice that it was only a tad bit of estrogen on the first panel, but this is a powerful estrogen panel here, so I'm sure we're going to get some direct and great responses, but I really do want to thank each of you for being here and to ask you to state your name and title for the record and just proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Shelley Cameron, CEO of Philadelphia International and Northeast Airports. Today, as you have already noted, I have two of my very highly qualified female compadres to talk about diversity with you today. Folasade Sade Olanipekun Lewis is our Chief Administrative Officer, and Kathy Padilla is the Director of our Airport Diversity Office. Kathy is going to deliver our testimony today, but we are all here to answer your questions. And I would like to personally assure you that diversity is a very important goal for me.
Good afternoon, members of the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development.
State your name and title for the record.
My name is Kathleen Padilla, and I'm the Director of the Office of Business Diversity. I'm pleased to be here today to testify regarding Resolution Number 160042, introduced by Councilman Johnson, and authorizing hearings on economic opportunity and diversity participation at the Philadelphia International Airport and at the Navy Yard. The airport is committed to creating economic opportunity and building diversity through our business relationships. We administer several programs designed to foster participation through our business opportunities. We oversee all aspects of the Federal Disadvantaged Business Enterprise and Airport Concession Disadvantaged Business Enterprise programs. This includes goal setting, certification, and monitoring. Along with these federal programs, we work with the Office of Economic Opportunity to administer the city's program. As part of our federal program requirements, we're implementing a small business element which applies specifically to opportunities funded by federal airport improvement grants. We also represent the city on the statewide oversight committee for U.S. DOT-funded projects along with other recipients and subrecipients. The airport's Business Opportunity Forum is the premier business diversity event in the region. We had 472 attendees this October, which is up from 377 last year. 149 of these firms were new firms, and 90% of our attendees rated the forum as excellent. The forum's networking breakfast fostered numerous connections between primes and subs, which we hope will lead to new opportunities and new partnerships for DBEs on our opportunities. We are always open to feedback and always looking for ways to improve our access to our opportunities. By way of goals and achievements, we report under the DBE, ACDBE, and OEO programs. For the DBE program, our goal is 16.3%, and our achievement this year is 18%. For the ACDBE program, our goal is 16.45%, and our achievement is 26.9%. In the storefront concessions that you see in the terminals, our achievement is currently 31.11%. For our own local OEO program, our goal is 30% and the achievement is 29.18%. Thank you. I will be happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you. Councilman Johnson?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. First and foremost, I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to say welcome back, Sade, to your first home here in the city of Philadelphia, as well as Ms. Padilla, thank you for participating as well, and also CEO of the Philadelphia International Airport, Shelley. Happy Veterans Day. I didn't get a chance to see you next week because I was a little tied up, but good to see you again here. Let's start off by talking about where we're at in terms of the airport expansion. It's always talked about throughout the district, specifically the 8.1, is it the correct number, $8.1 billion airport expansion. What it looks like in terms of the rollout, where we're at right now, where we're going in the future, and then begin giving us an overview of your strategic plan as it relates to the City of Philadelphia goals and how we're going to go about reaching them.
So, the Capacity Enhancement Program is the airport's larger capital plan for the future, and it was rolled out in about 5 years ago. In 2011, we received approval from the federal government to proceed with this program. Just because a program is approved by the federal government doesn't necessarily mean that there is funding available to pay for everything within the program. The $8.1 billion number that you stated, I think might have been an estimate at the time. That number changes as inflation is applied to the program, and we haven't done a new estimate to date, so I can't give you an exact number. Of that program, though, that was approved by the federal government, about 1.2 or $3 billion has been approved by the airlines to move, that we are permitted to move forward with on projects. We have $1.6 billion approved in total for the airport for capital programs. The balance that isn't CEP, Capacity Enhancement Program related, is for repair and rehab projects. So replacing things like air handling units in the terminals, rehabbing bathrooms, those sorts of things. Of the money that is already approved for the Capacity Enhancement Program, a lot of it is for design and planning work. Another large piece of it is for land acquisition. And furthermore, another piece is for some large projects, such as the consolidated rental car facility. We are actively working with the rental car companies to move that project forward. One of the other large projects that is already approved is work in Terminals B and C on the security checkpoint and baggage handling systems. And that leads me to the second part of your question, which is where are we going with this program? Where's it going next? When we looked at the numbers, the activity levels at the airport over the last 10 years, we noticed two trends. The first is that in the last 10 years, we've lost over 23% of our takeoffs and landings at the airport. In terms of passenger levels, when we look at figures as of the end of 2015, the passenger levels have stayed relatively stable and in fact are very near all-time highs for the airport. That speaks to two things that are happening. The first is that the airlines have fundamentally changed their business model. They're using larger aircraft and they're putting more people on each of those planes. What that results in is fewer operations, less landings and takeoffs. When you have fewer landings and takeoffs, it results in fewer delays and ultimately in less demand for our airfield facilities. One of the keystone projects of our Capacity Enhancement Program was for a new runway. That's what everybody seemed to talk about when we launched the program. But as we've looked at the decline in operations over the last 10 years, that's really not what our number one priority is today. When we look at the passenger levels, however, and they're steady, and they've stayed very steady over time, what we are doing is we are actually taking an active look at what our terminals are like. So what is the passenger experience like in our terminals? Some of our terminals are in excess of 60 years old. They're small, they have low ceilings, they're cramped. So we are working with the airlines to try and define what comes next in terms of the capacity enhancement program. Now, that program was holistic. It included airfield work, terminal work, and landside work like that consolidated rental car facility. As we looked at the operations and changed the priorities and really did a pivot on what was most needed, it was not the new runway now. That doesn't mean that it won't be needed at some point, but it's not the first priority today. What we really need to do is to look at our terminal facilities. So again, we are working with the airlines to define what that is. Under our use and lease agreement that you all approve, one of the parts of that agreement says that the airlines must approve the expenditure of capital dollars. It's part of our agreement with them. In return, they cover our costs every year. That's a great thing to have for them to cover your costs, but they do have approval authority, not just consultation rights, but approval authority over all capital projects. And again, we've established that partnership. We want to work together with them to really make sure that what we do next makes sense for the airport, for the city, and for them as our partners.
Okay. So, Ms. Padillo, can you give us an overview of one, because I know there's federal requirements, and then the city also have requirements. So tell me, how did you work to bring the two goals of both administrations together? That's the feds as well as the city. And then two, who is responsible for the enforcement, making sure that we're on track and reaching the goals, rather it be federal or the city as relates to diversity and inclusion?
I'll take the second question first, which is we are responsible here, and I am responsible for much of that. And we do that through all of the mechanisms that any mature diversity program has, by monitoring, by goal setting. We have oversight from the federal government and also from the OEO and also from the PAUCP. So we have many mechanisms to do this with. Is there anything particular I can expand upon?
What's PC, the last
The
agency that you...
PAUCP is the Pennsylvania Unified Certification Program. Every state has to have a UCP for USDOT funded work, and we're on the oversight committee for the one in Pennsylvania.
Okay, and so the oversight team meets once a month to review?
We meet at least quarterly for the oversight committee, but we also meet on an as-needed basis when there are appeals for certification denials.
Okay. I'm going to defer to Madam Chair.
Councilwoman Reynolds-Brown?
Yes, good afternoon, ladies.
Good afternoon.
I did not make myself clear in my last round of questioning, and so let me attempt again. There are people who look like me, my gender, who care not to be in the MBE, WBE box, because they have, the good news, risen to a level of success where they want to be treated as a prime. Rare instances, but some do exist. So is there any level of, for lack of not oversight, but keeping a reading on how well they are doing in the big picture of primes?
I think it's good to take a look at the two different programs here. For the DBE program, the federal program, you can graduate from that program. It has business size and person net worth standards. On the local program side, there are no business size or personal net worth standards. So you can graduate from the federal side, but not from the local side. Regarding whether someone wants to not get certified, they can participate like any other business. And we would not, there's no way to monitor or know who they are if they don't, if they're not in the system.
Okay.
Please. Councilman O had a point of order, and I thought she was going to come back, because I wanted to just make sure you heard Councilwoman Reynolds-Brown's question, because I think you really clarified it from the first go-around, and Councilman O, you sort of correct me if you've heard something else. So the Councilwoman Reynolds-Brown lays out that there are some firms that make a clear decision that they do not want to participate or attempt to compete to get business via MBE, WBE sort of programmatic structures. And they're doing so well that they are now primes, and they're sort of competing with the big guys on their own merit, based on their own bottom lines. And what she is saying is, have you sort of taken the time to sort of watch or monitor the performance? Councilwoman,
That's it precisely, yes.
Okay, have you monitored those that are sort of competing at the level with traditional primes without the actual certification at the federal level or the local level?
You can be a prime, be certified, and be counted. So that but if someone chooses not to, we would have no idea who you are.
And so we have no tracking mechanisms for those firms at this time.
So now you're answering her question.
That's correct. We have no way to monitor that at this time. There's no way to count those firms.
Okay, so that's helpful and potentially presents either new challenge or opportunity to see how well those who have risen to a level of success and now competing with the big guys, yet while they have been successful and now want to compete with the big guys, are not able to get in that circle, if you will, to your point, because they have not identified themselves as such.
Councilwoman, if I could add one thing. Kathy noted that there are firms that can graduate from the federal program.
Okay.
Their personal net worth may exceed the federal guidelines, and so they become graduates and are no longer able to be counted towards the federal goals, but they're the kinds of firms that you are referring to right now. They may be woman-owned or DB or minority-owned, but still doing business. There are a couple, one firm in particular recently graduated from the airport concession program and is no longer allowed to be counted for meeting the federal goal, but they're still in business and still doing work at the airport. We can find out that company's story and send it to you if you're interested.
Because the best case scenario is that all of these MBE, WBEs do so exceedingly well that, and that's going to be long after I leave City Council. We don't need an office of OEO. But for now, of course, the challenge continues. In the last testimony, one of the professionals stated that $50 million is the trigger for an oversight committee. Does that also apply to the airport?
Whatever the city requirements are for contracts that use city dollars, yes.
The same applies for you?
Yeah, we have the same rules as everybody else.
Okay. So the other revelation was, in instances where their federal dollars, the cities say, is limited because they are federal dollars when it comes to MBE, WBE effort. Is that accurate?
There are separate requirements in a separate program under the US DOT funded dollars, and we have to follow the rules that they prescribe.
So, for example, the federal, for contracts that contain federal funding, usually construction projects or ACDBE projects and contracts, we have to go through a federally mandated process to set those goals and then to monitor and include and count that participation every year.
And therefore, am I also hearing that the federal guidelines and stipulations supersede what we might want at this level?
For those particular contracts.
For those particular contracts. When negotiating with airlines, like American Airlines, what is the reach of influence when it comes to, and they want to do business here, and I'm using American Airlines because we know what the merger, the challenges and the extended discussions the merger presented. So what is the reach with regards to the city and our interests in MBE, WBE efforts?
So with American Airlines, when they perform a construction project on our behalf, on the city's behalf, and they have done that a couple of times. For example, the Terminal F project that just completed, it was a $161 million project. American Airlines completed that project on our behalf through a PIDC paid agreement.
Okay.
When we execute those sorts of agreements with American in this case,
sure,
to use city dollars to make improvements to our facilities on our behalf, we are very careful to make sure that we include appropriate goals.
Okay.
I'm happy to tell you on that project and on the Terminal A West project that was completed over a decade ago, that U.S. Airways at the time completed for us. They exceeded the goals that the city put on those. Very good partners of the city
All right,
in
then.
that regard.
Thank you. That's an encouraging outcome. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Absolutely.
Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much. So I just more than have a question, have got just a perspective to throw out there. On the question of the minority participation, in that I understand tracking minority or women-owned or persons with disability-owned businesses, they're certified and they're tracked. And then for prime contractors, since they're primes, they didn't go through a certification process, they're not being tracked. However, for example, in Atlanta and other cities, once a business has been certified, they're certified for a 3-year period of time. And then they have to be recertified, and that's because I think it is legislative. And in Philadelphia, we've operated under executive orders, and there are some issues that arise with the legalities of how we do things. So it would seem to me that it is probably a requirement that we track both minority certified and prime contractors so that we are able to provide, for example, under the law, the surveys that are required in order to enact programs that address disparity, historic discrimination, things like that. So if, for example, there are businesses that apply to be prime contractors and they are, for example, all minority and women-owned, that would have to be provided, I think, in an annual survey as to why the city has implemented a minority business program. That's kind of how I understand it at this point in time. And the reason I'll say that is because I actually drafted legislation and am holding the legislation, although I have kind of heard it, in terms of certain criteria which I don't know is legal, because it's a very finite space legally to provide opportunities and not tread upon reverse discrimination. And so one of the issues that I think we're talking about is that in the world of prime contractors, there are certain minority female-owned businesses that are simply applying for the large pot of work. They may bring on certified businesses, minority, women-owned, persons with disability, and there is some tracking mechanism for how they're doing what they're getting. And they do not want to graduate from the certified program. They're not interested in being certified or receiving that portion of set-aside work, if you will, because they are prime contractors.
If I could just offer a little, some clarification. First, I want to make sure that it's clear that we do know who our prime contractors are.
Right.
It's just if they don't identify themselves, if they're not certified, they don't carry a certification or identify themselves as a woman or minority-owned business, then they are not counted. It is absolutely possible for the airport and for the city to have a minority or woman-owned firm be a prime contractor. That happens, and that participation can be counted. So they can be a sub or they can be a prime. I understood the distinction to be made as to whether or not, with those firms in particular that don't want to pursue the certification or don't want to have it counted, we really don't have a mechanism to count that.
Okay, I do understand.
I hope that helps.
Yes, so if they voluntarily identify some characteristics, then you'll have it. If they don't, then you won't have it. It's kind of up to them.
Correct.
So if they do want to identify themselves, or do you ask? They may say, we don't want to tell you, or
Well,
is that a problem
we would
as
be
well?
making a presumption. If they're not certified, we don't know that they've met the standards to be considered a minority or woman-owned business.
Okay.
And lots of people come to get certified that you might think on the outside are minority and women-owned, but aren't when you take a closer look.
Okay. All right, thank you. That answers my question, thank you.
Sure.
Councilman Johnson.
Thank you. I want to go back to our relationships with the federal government and the requirements that the feds have versus the city. And I think if I heard correctly, Mr. Harold Epps, is the goals for the federal requirements higher or lower than the city of Philadelphia?
They would generally be lower
Lower.
when it comes for US DOT-funded projects. And that's for a number of reasons. They require us to use their methodology, which is slightly different. And they also have their program set up as a small business program. So there are limits on how large the firms can participate can be. So yes, our number of about 16.4%, if you want to compare apples to apples, PennDOT's number in that area is 7.8%. When you look at the SEPTA that combines both this local and federal program, they're at 16%. If you look at the Delaware River Port Authority, which combines federal and local again, so it should be higher, they're at 10%. So we're doing at least twice the
as
federal level of participation than our sister agencies.
And in terms of, what's the percentage of contracting under the Division of Aviation falls under the federal DBE program versus the Office of Equal Opportunity? When you talk about there's only certain contracts that we can enforce on the city side versus on the federal side?
It varies from year to year depending on what kind of contracting we get, funding we get from the federal government and from the local. Probably right now, I'm going to guess it's about a third of our dollars that are in the contracting as far as that, and all of the ACDBE dollars are considered federal.
Okay. And when we talk about building capacity for diversity and inclusion, does the bundling strategy play a role in how we go about on the building trade sides of contracts?
That is one of the approaches you can take to try and increase diversity, debundling and we are actually looking at trying to set up a more formal process to that with our small business element that we're setting up next year.
Okay. And to build on it now, I know the work that the airport does because I try to be involved as a council person. Talk more about the bonding workshops that you have offered with the Enterprise Center. How effective has they been? What's the level of participation of people who actually come out in the workshops and actually sign up?
So we,
Because one of the key questions we always get is, well, we can't find nobody to do the work because they can't handle the capacity. And so I do know we have a model that's put forward in terms of helping the smaller guys be able to compete, and we'll say, well, we'll show you how to go through the bonding process with us. How effective has it been?
It was very effective. We did one program a couple of years ago, and actually I think it's where I met Iola when she was still with the Enterprise Center. We partnered with the Enterprise Center and a federal agency to actually put firms who signed up through a very rigorous process. When they came out of that program, if they wanted, they could pursue and obtain a federal certification for an MBE or WBE firm. And then we also paired them with financial institutions that agreed to participate as part of the program. And if they completed all of the requirements successfully, they could actually come out with a bond that they could then use to bid on their next contract. It's been a couple of years. I don't have those numbers in front of me, Councilman.
Yes.
But that one program was incredibly successful. We've done additional education sessions just to talk about the kinds of things you need to do to get ready to get a bond, but that program in particular was very successful. We even were able to get some federal dollars to fund it, and we are actively pursuing whether or not we can get that again.
Can we have those numbers for the members of the committee? at the appropriate time, please?
We also do a number of business capacity workshops, usually about one a month, and they do a number of different subjects, and we partner with a lot of different agencies, including the Chambers, Eastern Minority Supplier Development Council, Department of Labor, SEPTA, PennDOT, DRPA, Philadelphia Port Authority, and they've been on focused strategy for winning construction contracts, how to do business with the city and the PHL, how to get certified, workforce diversity with OSHA, anatomy of a request for a proposal, accessing our opportunities in the digital age, and doing business with regional transit authorities. So we have some other ones that are in the planning stage. We're going to be doing one with PIDC in December, focused specifically on getting funding for our concessions owners. And we're going to be doing one with the new Commission for Women on doing business with the city in February.
Okay. Councilman, Madam Chair.
Councilwoman Reynolds Brown?
We would be pleased to be made aware of those opportunities so that we can share that with the small business owners that contact our office on a regular basis, wondering how they can penetrate and have access to government in that way. So if you could just make it a standard operating procedure and keep us posted, that would be very much appreciated.
Absolutely. And we would love any help that you could give us in advertising those sessions. We love to have new participants in particular.
Okay. Councilman Johnson spoke to the issue of debundling. Philosophically, why is that important? Let me not editorialize. Give me your position on debundling it and why you do it.
Well, it's important because then you provide opportunities where firms that are not as large can participate as primes and get that experience, so then they can grow to be primes on larger projects.
And where are you in making that real for companies in the debundling process?
As I mentioned, we're looking forward to having a more formal program with that, with our small business element. But the areas where we see that happening are particularly on our on-call contracts, where there's a lot of opportunity to have specific smaller pieces of work broken out. But we need to take a holistic view of all of our contracts with our engineering staff to try and identify things that can be broken out, because a lot of our projects are very large and
Sure.
it's hard to find the places
Sure.
where you can.
And so what's your timeline for implementation and moving and achieving what you just articulated?
We're looking to try and have something started in January or February,
Okay.
and we'll refine it as we progress.
Okay.
I would just want to note one other thing is, as we talk about the rehab and repair projects that are ongoing at the airport, one of the things that I mentioned was bathroom rehabilitation. One of the ways that we've approached those projects is to do it in phases. So we can't take down every bathroom in the airport all at once. It's impractical. We wouldn't be able to operate the airport. But by taking that project, all of those restrooms that need to be renovated, and breaking it apart into phases, we are able to have smaller pieces of work that then theoretically should be available more readily to smaller firms to be able to bid on.
Okay. So in addition to debundling, what other areas, challenging areas or areas of challenge is the airport facing that we have not covered in our questions that we should be aware of?
I think
And
that
so-
it is capacity. There's always issues with people getting funding. Yeah, but we are trying to address those.
And it's really, when we say capacity, it's capacity in the region of firms that are truly qualified to do the work that we have in front of us. So it's making sure that there are firms that don't just do things like provide supplies for construction contracts, but firms that are minority-owned, women-owned, that are in this region, in this city, that are able to be pulled in as participants on those contracts.
One of the things we did as far as outreach for our last session of the Business Opportunity Forum that was different is we started doing our outreach much earlier. We kept contact up much more frequently.
You started doing what?
We did our contact much earlier, the invitations to these firms. We kept the contact up much more frequently. We let them know which primes were going to be there, so they were enticed to come to the event. But we also did a really large search in the region for all of the firms that are DBEs from all of the different directories. And we targeted those by our projected work that's coming up at the airport, because when we project the work out, we do that also broken down by the NACE codes. Well, the NACE codes are also what you're certified to operate under by these different programs. So we tried to specifically reach out to firms that can provide the services and goods that we're going to be needing, as opposed to just shotgun
Saying.
sort of a outreach.
Okay.
And we're hopeful that that will increase our participation rate significantly.
Okay.
I just want to note one other thing about the Business Opportunity Forum. The name of the firm is escaping me, but one of the primes stopped me at the event and said, you know, we've been coming to this event for the last 3 or 4 years, and we want to let you know that it's very valuable to us, too, as a prime contractor. He said that of the 5 subs, minority and women-owned sub-consultants on his contract, he met 4 of them at our Business Opportunity Forum. He was actually introduced to them and met them and pursued relationships from that forum. So we see that as a real success in being able to, you know, for some firms who just want to get started and want to pair up with a
Sure.
prime contractor, that's a great way to get started, so that hopefully they'll be in the coming years, able to compete on a level playing field with those same primes.
Well, I'd like to credit the airport for continuing that effort that was started by Councilman Johnson and I 4 or 5 years ago, which came out of meeting with small business people who were frustrated that the city, we were not doing a good job in making the connect. And I might add, they're not at the table yet, but PIDC in my office have been doing that similar experience for almost 10 years. And it does yield relationships that move businesses towards gaining business opportunities.
Councilwoman, I want to remind you, you're a staunch supporter from a capacity standpoint, and in the 4 years I was working at City Council, particularly on the technical side, you always talked about how do you bring firms to the table so they can get opportunity. And if you recall, refresh your recollection a little bit, is for the bond lawyers and the bankers, you were always struggling to see how the small firms can get involved on these transactions. And so we would pair them up with the majority firms so they developed technical capacity so that at some point they could lead a transaction on their own instead of having to pair up. And that's kind of what we're doing here at the airport.
Okay.
As you recall.
I do now. Thank you.
I want to drop the mic on that last part, but no, because at the end of the
Councilman Johnson.
Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's about progress, partnering up primes with subs. And I'm not big on the excuse that, well, we can't find nobody that can do it. There was a guy named Maynard Jackson in Atlanta and said, well, if you want to do business in my office, then you're going to figure it out or we're not moving forward. And that's not to really it's about accountability. These taxpayer dollars at the end of the day, and the more we move forward and build as a city, it should reflect what the city looks like as a whole. I do have a question regarding workforce on the building trade side and on the professional service side, but specifically, how do you go about doing the enforcement, making sure when we're doing all these capital projects on the ground, when you're visiting the sites, that the individuals who receive these contracts to do the construction projects are diverse and inclusive, and especially if it's federally mandated in conjunction with the city, where's the enforcement component to make sure that when they're doing not the large runway, but the smaller runways or any type of capital project from an actual building trade standpoint, that process is diverse and inclusive on the work site?
Well, specifically on the federal projects, we do our own monitoring.
Okay.
And we monitor prompt payments. We make sure that these job sites are posted about who's supposed to be working there. And we do on-site monitoring. We would go and review all of the contracts and review all of the payments and review everything about that contract for that diversity participation.
So who's the person that goes, so part of your team is
I go to the website.
You go to your
I go to
sites.
the work site.
You go to the work site and
Yes.
check on them. Good. Okay. All right. Can we also, I think I may have numbers from last year, but if you can give me your latest update just for us just to get an idea moving forward, that'll be helpful. That's good. Okay. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you all so very much for your testimony. Let me just quickly ask, on any of your projects or any of the work being done there, do you ever use, particularly from a city's perspective, a third-party monitor on any projects there? Are there any third-party monitors that the airport has engaged on any of its projects?
We have vendors.
I
Yeah, I'm not aware of any third-party monitors right now. We do have a professional services contract at the airport that helps us with the federal DBE program, and I think that's one of the things that they could do, but we haven't really used them to date.
Okay. Councilman Taubenberger.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. Just one quick question on, I believe it came from this panel. There was a project that was administered by American Airlines in Terminal F.
Correct.
Was that a federal project, or was that what you would consider a federal project?
That was not a federal project, no.
Okay, city project.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman Kenyatta?
Yes.
You said you wanted an update. I wasn't clear what the update was you wanted. I'm sorry.
Yes. So on the capital project side, right, specific around construction and building trades, want to get an idea of what that participation looks like from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. So I know there's pavement projects going on out there. I know we've done zoning for additional parcels of land in the future that will be developed, but in terms of all the capital projects that have gone through that are building trade related, just want to get an idea where we're at in terms of inclusivity and diversity, please.
Thank you all for your testimony. The clerk will please call the third panel of witnesses to testify on the resolution.
John Grady, Prima Gupta, Brian Cohen, and Michael Hill.
And as you're being seated, let me just state good afternoon for the record. Please state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Good afternoon, John Grady, President of Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, PIDC.
Prima Katari Gupta, Senior Vice President, PIDC for the Navy Yard.
John Gattuso, Senior Vice President and Regional Director for Liberty Property Trust.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is John Grady. As I said, I'm the president of the Philadelphia Industrial Development.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we
Sure.
just had one other person who we had listed as being a part of this panel. We wanted him to state his name for the record.
Madam Chair, I'm filling in for Michael Hill, Bill Wilson with Centerra.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to offer testimony today on Resolution 160042, particularly as it relates to PIDC's ongoing work to create economic opportunity at the Navy Yard. As you heard, with me here today is Prima Katari Gupta, our Senior Vice President for Navy Yard Planning and Development, and representatives from our development partner, Liberty Centerra. Some quick background, and as many of you already know, PIDC is a private nonprofit corporation. We were created in 1958 as a partnership between the City of Philadelphia and the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce. We're fortunate to have Councilman Johnson and Councilwoman Blackwell as members of our executive committee and our board of directors. Our mission is to spur investment, to support business growth. We invest both public resources and private resources in small business growth, community-based development, and real estate developments around the city that create jobs, revitalize neighborhoods, and drive growth to every corner of our city. Promoting diversity and growth and access to economic opportunity in our own organization through our business lending, development finance, real estate procurement, and all of our lending activity is a priority for us at PIDC. We think it's entirely consistent and important to our mission around economic growth, and particularly so in our work at the Navy Yard. Some of the things that we've done to promote diversity and inclusion in our work around the city include things like expanding our small business lending throughout the city. We've doubled the amount of small business loans we've made over the last 3 years. We've reduced the average loan size to reach smaller businesses and borrowers that have difficulty accessing traditional credit, and we've made loans in 91% of the city's zip codes. We've also borrowed more than $30 million ourselves of private capital to fund new working capital and contract receivable lines of credit to support businesses in the city most in need of credit as they grow their business and build wealth in those businesses. Those loans have been particularly focused around a network of almost 30 now small minority and women-owned contractors who are acting as both subcontractors and prime contractors on work throughout the city. We've increased the percentage of the loans that we're providing to minority and women-owned businesses. Last year, 36% of our loans went to minority-owned businesses, and 20% additional went to women-owned businesses. So over 56% of our loans last year, we made about 85 small business loans, went to minority or women-owned businesses. We're also developing and expanding access to technical assistance. You heard earlier particularly about the great work being done at the Enterprise Center. Last year, we hosted 23 workshops across the year that had more than 400 business owners attend so that they could grow the skills that they need to access opportunity in our growing economy. More than 50% of the participants in our workshops have been minority business owners, an additional 30% are women. We also participate with the City's Office of Economic Opportunity and others to promote access to our resources as a lender, as an investor in development projects, and in the procurement and employment opportunities throughout the city. In our work with OEO, and all of our procurement gets reported to OEO and is included in OEO's submission to City Council every year. In our work with OEO around diversity in our own contracting opportunities at PIDC, in our central office, last year 36% of our available contracting opportunities went to minority and women-owned businesses. We're here today to talk specifically about the Navy Yard, where our role is to manage the initial property acquisition from the Navy back in the late 90s and early 2000s, to lead the planning, property management, and infrastructure development that's necessary to manage a modern urban employment campus and to attract private investment. And third, we recruit partners to invest in job growth and development around the property. In all of our activities, we're very focused on increasing diversity, inclusion, and access to economic opportunity for as broad a spectrum of participants as possible. Our efforts at the Navy Yard have included selecting Liberty Property Trust and Centera Partners as our primary commercial and industrial development partner at the Navy Yard through a competitive process in the early 2000s. That selection was made in part because the partnership of Liberty and Centera includes meaningful participation by a minority-owned business in its ownership and its management. We also established economic opportunity goals for the design, construction, and operation of every project that they develop. Liberty and Centera will talk more about their partnership, their investment at the Navy Yard, and their successful record in promoting diversity and access to opportunity in the new commercial and industrial development occurring there. We've continued to partner with Liberty Centera and Councilman Johnson's office to host regular procurement fairs for vendors and contractors to connect to business opportunities, the most recent of which was just held a few weeks ago. As Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown mentioned, we've hosted an annual MedWeek event with the City OEO office, the Councilwoman and Councilman Johnson, to highlight employment and business growth opportunities at the Navy Yard. That's been a particularly successful opportunity to reach new audiences of businesses, and the success of that activity builds more success each year. Companies want to get invited to that session each week, and the attendance continues to grow as a result. We also have supported Councilman Johnson's office over the last few years in hosting a job fair for Navy Yard employers where permanent employment opportunities we can begin the process of making permanent opportunities available to people, particularly those located in close proximity to the Navy Yard. And then lastly, as we work closely with OEO, we establish goals to expand diversity in our contracting for property operations and infrastructure development. That's our core function at the Navy Yard. We invest in roads, we clear sites, we maintain buildings. As a result of those efforts, 41% of our available purchasing to support property operations last year went to minority and women-owned companies. In addition, from time to time, we take on large infrastructure development projects, water and sewer renewal projects, road development projects, either on our own or in partnership with local or state government. Our last infrastructure program, which was monitored by OEO, achieved 30% participation from minority and women-owned companies combined. We're proud of these numbers and the collaborative efforts with council members, OEO, Liberty Centera, and others to achieve them. However, we always are trying to improve our efforts to promote and achieve greater participation in the growing economic activity that we see every day at the Navy Yard and around the city. We appreciate and support the spotlight that you are shining on this need to support small minority and women-owned businesses, particularly, and we thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm going to ask John Gattuso from Liberty Property Trust to provide some comments on Liberty Centera's activity, and then I think we're all available to answer questions.
Well, thank you, John. And Madam Chair and members of the committee, I thank you for your time and allowing for us to be here this afternoon to testify. I will offer some comments, and I'll offer them on behalf of both Liberty and Centerra. Mr. Wilson from Centerra is here as well with me to answer questions after my testimony. Again, my name is John Gattuso, and I'm the Senior Vice President and Regional Director for Liberty Property Trust. I head Liberty's Urban Development Group, which is responsible for the company's activities in our urban markets across the country. I'd also like to note that Bill Hankowski, our Chairman, President, and CEO, sends his apologies to the committee as he is currently out of the country, and otherwise he would have been here today with me to present on behalf of Liberty. I'm sure many of you on the committee have heard of Liberty, but may not know exactly who we are and what we do. Therefore, I appreciate the opportunity to share a little more about our story and the work which Liberty Property Trust, along with our joint venture partner, Centerra Partners, are doing at the Navy Yard. To begin, Liberty Property Trust is a $9 billion New York Stock Exchange listed real estate investment trust, or REIT. And while we are headquartered here in the Philadelphia region, and while our urban group is based here in Center City, Philadelphia, most of what we do outside of the Philadelphia region. Currently, we operate or have under development over 100 million square feet of primarily industrial real estate in 23 markets across the United States and Great Britain. In Philadelphia, Liberty Property Trust has a proud and extensive history of developing the highest quality projects that enhance our city's economic base. These include 1 and 2 Liberty Place, developed by our predecessor company, Rouse & Associates, Comcast Center, the new Comcast Technology Center, the TJX warehouse in Northeast Philadelphia, the PNC Bank Operations Center at the airport, and of course, the Navy Yard. The redevelopment of the Navy Yard, which has been skillfully led by PIDC, is widely considered to be among the most successful conversions of a former military base in the United States. A 1,200-acre redevelopment, it is currently home to 12,000 employees and more than 150 private companies. Liberty and Centerra are involved in that portion of the Navy Yard redevelopment, focusing on the development of new commercial office and industrial buildings, which we lease to third-party companies. There have been over $1 billion in development projects at the Navy Yard, and we are proud that our partnership with Centerra is responsible for approximately 1/3 of that total.
Excuse me, can you say that number again, the first number?
$1 billion?
$1 billion?
Yes.
In the Navy Yard?
Yes.
Okay, just want to hear that for the record.
At the Navy Yard, as in all of our development work, Liberty strives to develop buildings which enhance the lives of the people who work in them, while at the same time enhancing the communities in which they are situated. This commitment to improving the communities in which we do business has been a part of our company culture since our founding in 1972 by the late Willard G. Rouse, one of Philadelphia's great civic leaders. We have a deep love for the city of Philadelphia and are committed to working with this council, this administration, and all the citizens of the city to ensure it reaches its full potential as one of the great cities of the world. Our employees from the executive level down are actively involved on nonprofit boards, including the United Way, the Fairmount Park Conservancy, Valley Youth House, which serves homeless Philadelphia youth, Project Home, Leadership Philadelphia, the African American Museum, and the Charter High School for Architecture and Design, and numerous others. Each year, Liberty has its annual Bill Rouse Day of Caring, a day of service where Liberty employees have renovated community centers and nonprofit facilities throughout the city, such as at FDR Park, the Smith Memorial Playground, and the Marion Anderson Recreation Center in South Philadelphia. While we are proud of our community and civic service, we also believe it is our responsibility to offer economic opportunities as part of our everyday business. We are committed to a diverse workforce and to ensuring that the vendors we do business with match the diversity of the people in this city. We do this not only because it is the right thing to do, but because it makes good business sense. As one of the largest investors in the city of Philadelphia, where we have invested over $2 billion over the last 15 years, we feel a responsibility to help build a vibrant and diverse workforce and a safe, strong, and prosperous community. In 2002, Liberty partnered with Centerra Partners, founded by Bill Wilson, to respond to an RFP from PIDC seeking a developer for a portion of the Navy Yard. In August of that year, we were pleased to be selected by PIDC to undertake this important development. In response to PIDC's charge to include a substantive economic opportunity component, our unique partnership made a collective commitment to inclusion at each level of our effort, including ownership, development, and the ongoing operations of the real estate. This commitment was, and we believe still is, amongst the most comprehensive inclusion strategies ever undertaken in the city. During Liberty and Centerra's early efforts at the Navy Yard, we executed on the strategy with a certain degree of success, but we also gained an appreciation of the many challenges associated with this effort. We came to realize that to be truly successful in providing the maximum economic opportunity for minority, female, veteran, and disabled-owned businesses, as well as achieving a construction period and a building operations workforce that is representative of Philadelphia, we would require a robust outreach within our targeted communities. We also needed the ability to more accurately and efficiently track our performance. Toward this end, we engaged the Urban Affairs Coalition, and with the assistance of Charmaine Matlock Turner and Carlos Jones, both of whom I believe are here today, we created a comprehensive Navy Yard inclusion strategy. This inclusion strategy provides goals, processes, and procedures, as well as reporting and oversight guidelines for Liberty Centerra, as well as our vendors, to follow in connection with the partnership's development projects and operations. At the end of 2015, we reanalyzed this inclusion strategy with Phil Butler and Michael Bowman from Rittenhouse Strategies to further put in place procedures and engaged with Rittenhouse for additional oversight and reporting. As a result of these efforts, we are pleased to say that we believe we have one of the most comprehensive and successful inclusion strategies of any real estate developer in Philadelphia. This is not to claim perfection or that there's not more, in fact, that we can do, but this enhanced focus is providing a much more consistent and successful set of outcomes across the board. During this process, we have learned a great deal, particularly from our small business vendors. We have learned how to be more entrepreneurial in our thinking. We have learned more about the challenges that small businesses face when competing for work and what role we can play in providing solutions and assistance. We learned that if we want to create legitimate opportunities, there cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach with regard to our RFP process. We have learned how to unbundle larger procurement opportunities, which was spoken about by the previous panel, so that minority and female firms can better align their resources and build capacity in order to be in a better position to respond and be successful. This process also better enabled us to introduce smaller minority firms to majority firms to create successful joint ventures. To date, we are pleased to say that we have created a biannual vendors outreach meeting where we host MBE and WBEs to discuss upcoming procurement opportunities for professional services, construction, and operations. Our thanks and appreciation to Councilman Johnson, who spoke at our recent event at the Navy Yard, showing his support for this effort, which is very well received. We have created a database of 245 MBE, WBE, and DBE companies with whom we have met to understand their capabilities and to determine appropriate level of contract opportunities for them. And we have established enhanced diversity and inclusion goals and objectives for our work at the Navy Yard. These include, in the areas of contracting, by which I mean our contracts with minority and business and female-owned businesses, we established a goal of 18 to 28%, and have achieved to date an actual percentage of 22.52%. With regard to workforce, meaning on-site construction labor, we had a goal of 15 to 25%, and to date have accomplished a percentage of 23.19%. In operations, we established a goal of 25 to 35%, and our actual today is 28.4%. And finally, in the area of professional services, which includes engineering, architecture, law, environmental services, and project management, we have established a goal of 15 to 20%, and today we're at 14.11%, and clearly an area that still needs a lot of focus and effort, but one in which I think we're starting to see some good movement, but which requires a lot of creativity and effort on the parts of ourselves and also our service providers. Over the last 12 months, we have awarded over $10.5 million to 48 disadvantaged companies, in connection with our work at the Navy Yard, and over $17.2 million to 44 Philadelphia-based companies with regard to that work. Over the last 12 months, we have created over 17,500 hours of work for minority men and women, and over 22,000 hours of work for Philadelphia residents in the construction of our buildings at the Navy Yard. Our Liberty Philadelphia office, which is comprised of 20% minorities, 40% female, and 50% Philadelphia residents, also participated in Philadelphia Youth Network's internship program with 3 interns, and partnered with Cristo Rey High School, where we sponsored 4 high school interns each year. As a result of these efforts, we were nominated for Company of the Year by the Eastern Minority Supplier Network in 2016. While we're proud of all these accomplishments, we realize there's still much work to do. We continue to seek feedback to understand how to better create opportunities for unbundling. This is very important. We are continuing to encourage and work with the trades to maximize their ongoing outreach efforts within the minority community and to women, and have made it clear to our many contractors, to the extent they want our continued business, that best efforts is an expectation of what they will achieve rather than just an easy way out which allows them to say we tried. Right? And that's very important, and we've put a major emphasis on it. Ultimately, we believe it is critical for the cities, the regions, and our own success that we collectively find a way to greatly enhance capacity within the minority, women, veteran, and disabled-owned business community, as well as to maximize diversity in the workforce. This means taking a long-term commitment to nurture and grow sustainable, highly capable, disadvantaged firms. Firms that can successfully compete in the open market, that are financially stable, that can achieve scale, and ultimately deliver enhanced capability and competitiveness to our local marketplace, as well as enhanced opportunity to the citizens of this community. We acknowledge again that much work in this area remains to be done. Please be assured that Liberty is committed to be a part of the solution, working in partnership with the Urban Affairs Coalition, Rittenhouse Strategies, and our other trusted partners. We will work to continue to make progress with these efforts. I thank you again for your time today and look forward to any feedback and questions you may have.
Thank you all so very much for your testimony. Let me welcome back Councilwoman Janie Blackwell. And let me just also state for the record, we appreciated having your testimony, John, but for Liberty, it's Liberty and it's your body of work, but what you just gave us was definitely precedent setting. So please make sure before you leave today that we as a committee have a copy of that testimony. Yes. So that we can sort of get it on the record, because as disciplined as I am in trying to record those numbers that you were reading during your testimony, we can't. So as a matter of accuracy, we want to make sure that we do that. And the chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank all of you for being here, John, Prima, and John, and Mr. Centera. How you doing, Mike? So I just want to start from the basics with John, if you can help me out, John, and members of the committee who may not know the structure of the relationships between the City of Philadelphia and PIDC and its role with the Philadelphia Navy Yard. And most people probably may remember or may not, but it's prior to my time coming to City Council, but just always growing up in South Philadelphia and coming down the stadium area as a kid and coming to veteran stadiums and coming to what we call the Lakes, which is officially FDR Park, and catching the 17 into the Navy Yard at one time was going to be shut down. Today, close to 12,000, is it 12,000 jobs? Close to 12,000 jobs. And it's also one of the economic assets here in the city of Philadelphia, and it's something that we should be proud of as a city. But I want you to just give us an overview on what that arrangement looks like, and then begin to give me an overview on PIDC's role, separate from Liberty Property Trust, but PIDC's role in commitment to diversity, inclusion. You talked about some numbers, but elaborate on it. And I also see that you're talking about the Office of Equal Opportunity. That would be Ms. Harper in the back. What does that arrangement look like to make sure that the development, the projects, whether it's on the building trade side or professional services, that $1 billion investment on one end that was just mentioned from Liberty Property Trust, people are participating from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. And I mentioned this in our meeting in my office. Even separate from Liberty Property Trust, there's other development projects that do take place. I think they only deal with all new construction, but there's other projects as well where I would think that PIDC has an aggressive strategy plan in place to say, hey, listen, as we build in this Navy Yard, we want to make sure it's diverse and inclusive as a partnership with the city of Philadelphia, as a quasi-governmental public agency.
Sure. Yeah. I'll try to cover all that. If I start with just kind of, again, on as PIDC, as an organization, private nonprofit, we act on behalf of and in partnership with the city in economic development activities around the city. Those are primarily focused around small business lending, technical assistance for small businesses, community investment projects. So you all see us in your districts and parts of the city in neighborhood retail centers, community health facilities, those kinds of developments. And then larger economic development projects like, as you mentioned, stadium project or hotel projects in town or a project like the Navy Yard. We're organized as a partnership where about half of our governance is appointed by the business community, so half of our board of directors, and the other half is appointed by the city. The mayor and his cabinet sit at the executive committee, and the council president appoints 2 members of that committee and 2 members of the board, Councilman Johnson and Councilman Blackwell, who both serve in those roles now. So I really think of us as a partner to the city in taking on these kinds of initiatives. We tend to focus our activity around transactional work, so we're investing money, we're lending money, we're structuring projects, where it's more difficult for the city to enter into those kinds of negotiations or transactions directly. And that's, I think, been our role historically since the late 1950s in the city. At the Navy Yard, we work on behalf of the city, and we work specifically on behalf of the Philadelphia Authority for Industrial Development, PAID. PAID is a public authority, and PIDC manages all of its activities. And at the Navy Yard, when the original base closure announcement was made in the early 1990s, 1991 was when the first closure announcement was made, and then there were successive announcements in 1993 and 1995. The city designated PIDC and paid to be the city's representatives in negotiating the acquisition of that property from the federal government and the transition of it to civilian use. We, on behalf of PAID, acquired about 1,000 acres of property at the Navy Yard in 2000 and 2001, and really started our work there investing in infrastructure, building roads, building utilities, demolishing obsolete buildings that weren't going to be able to be reused for modern day use. And then we also began the process of reaching out to market the property and identify users who were interested in investing. And I think that continues to be our primary role today. We're there to manage the public spaces, the roads and utilities, to make sure that there's an infrastructure that can be supportive of private investment. Unlike in the rest of the city, the streets aren't owned and operated by the city. So when it snows, we hire contractors to plow the streets. When a pothole has to be fixed, we manage the repair of that work. We maintain the parks and open spaces around the property on behalf of the tenants and businesses that use them. So we kind of provide that central infrastructure, planning and development function. We also continue to provide a central role to make sure that we have a message about the Navy Yard and about the city, that this is a place that's available for investment and a place to grow your business. As you mentioned, when the military closed the base in the 90s, the employment there went down to about 2,000 was the low, and the Navy continues to have about 2,000 or 2,500 employees on site that are Navy employees in Navy-owned buildings and Navy-owned facilities. In addition to those employees, we now have a total of about 13,000 people that come to work every day at the Navy Yard. And that's growing by, roughly 1,000 people a year. Some years it's more, some years it's less. We're seeing that kind of growth from the roster of companies that are there. So we have about 160 or 165 companies that employ people at the Navy Yard. A company like Urban Outfitters, who has over 3,000 employees at the Navy Yard now. They added 250 employees just in their existing operations down there over the last year. So it's a mix of new companies coming and investing and growing, and existing businesses that are continuing to grow their footprint and their employment here in the city. In terms of our role around engagement with economic opportunity, we participate and cooperate completely with the Commerce Department and OEO. So in our own procurement, in our central operations downtown, we work closely with OEO on procurement opportunities, and as I said, we report our goals and our success in those goals as part of the report submitted every year by OEO. We believe strongly that our role is to promote diversity. We love when we can particularly do that here in the city of Philadelphia and target purchasing to businesses that are located and growing here in the city. At the Navy Yard, as I said with some of the specifics in my testimony, our role in procurement is largely around operation and maintenance of the property. I think of a firm like Four Seasons Landscaping, which is a woman-owned landscape business. They hold the prime contract for us for the maintenance of the majority of our open space at the Navy Yard. I think of a firm like KS Engineers, which is a firm that came to us through the MedWeek presentation probably 10 years ago. They were one of the first companies to come to us. They do a lot of work in helping us to make sure that our civil engineering in the parks and open spaces and the roads and our maintenance of older buildings is appropriate. So we direct our spending largely to operation and maintenance of the property, and then from time to time we will take on a large infrastructure project. We'll build new roads, we'll build new utility systems. PennDOT will be building a new road next year across the main entrance to the property. So we will work with them to make sure that there's appropriate goals in place and an OEO program to attract the kind of participation that we think is important for our infrastructure. The last piece you comment, the Navy Yard is a very diverse place in terms of the number of businesses. I mentioned 165 businesses. Liberty and Centerra control the development rights for about 150 acres at the Navy Yard. When we acquired property from the military, we acquired about 1,000 acres. Large portions of that have been conveyed to the Commonwealth for the port expansion project, to the Commonwealth to support the Ocker Shipyard when that was originally developed, 120 acres to support that project. So we are managing now an inventory of about 300 or 400 acres of land that remains in our control. About half of that has been developed to date, part of it in partnership with Liberty Centerra and their new buildings. And we have worked with other users and developers. Urban Outfitters, I mentioned, has acquired a number of buildings from us where they pay fair market value for the building. They invest the money in the redevelopment of the buildings. We don't provide any subsidy. We don't provide any incentives. They do that purely at an arm's length fair market value. We have smaller companies that have purchased properties over the years, redeveloped those properties and put them into productive use. And again, typically when we're bringing some incentive or subsidy to a transaction is when we use that leverage to make sure there's an appropriate economic opportunity plan in place. And I would say again, largely, particularly with the discussion earlier, we try to do that whether it's legally required or not, because we just think it's good practice. And again, I think the testimony...
Can you elaborate how? Like give us specific examples. Like since y'all do it from the perspective rather it's legally required or not, give us an overview like this is what we do. Separate from your requirement, this is how we go about making sure that there's diversity and inclusion as relates to the projects that we work on.
I think the key for us in that is if there is a transaction where we might be leasing or conveying a property outside of our Liberty Centerra relationship, we want to start from the beginning by making folks aware of what our inventory of firms are that have been successful at the Navy Yard in supplying developers and building managers. We want to talk to them very early on about how to engage the community, whether it's on the labor side or it's on the professional services side or on the construction firm side. I think one of the nice things, our work around the city with the contractor line of credit program has now put us in direct contact, daily contact, with about 30 minority and women-owned contractors, big and small, firms that we lend $50,000 to or that we lend $2 million to. that's a great resource for us to be able to make those relationships that we have available to them. Because they may not, as smaller firms, they may not have access to those kinds of relationships. So I think it starts with awareness, it starts with promoting opportunity, it starts with providing information and resources so that people can make the decisions that we think are the best decisions in the long run.
Okay. I'm going to defer to...
Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this comprehensive testimony. I did listen with interest, Mr. Cattuso, and not having it right away. Speak again, if you would, to the 3 challenges that you believe currently face, PIDC is currently facing, and period. Let's start there. The 3 challenges. I mean, one of them, you spoke about debundling. Why don't you elaborate on that?
Sure, okay. Well, I think the challenges that we identified and that I spoke to were the need to work with the building trades to really have them continue and to push with their outreach into the minority community and also to women. Because I think if we look at, whether it's at the Navy Yard or Comcast Center, other places we're tracking performance, I mean, we clearly see the benefits of making a determined effort at the trade level to get as many apprentices, as many minority and female members into the apprenticeship program. I mean, these are things which we think are ultimately good not only for the city in general, but then selfishly they're very good for our industry because we do suffer from a labor shortage in certain regards. So we think that's one area of definite focus. I also mentioned that, just I'll go right to my comments, that, I think in the area of, for instance, professional services, this is an area which is a challenge, and I think we have to be very creative in how we tackle the issue of getting greater diversity with our professional services. I would give you 2 examples of creativity. One is, for instance, on our Comcast Center project, we actually, and it's it's an approach that we will deploy at the Navy Yard. In the area of project management, we actually went to Robert Bright and Townsend Associates, who was a very capable consultant of ours who was doing audit work on that project, and worked with him so he opened up a whole new line of business, which was project management. So he's not a sub, he's now a prime contractor with a $6.5 million contract providing world-class project management on our second Comcast tower. That's the kind of approach where you're going directly to people, you're working very closely with them to give them both the motivation and the support to go into a new line of business, for instance. We work with Manny Kelly at Kelly Maiello, who has been doing a magnificent job, basically as a production architect on many major projects in the city. But, for instance, he may not be an architect that would typically get a design contract, in other words, be the lead designer. He would always be the support. And what we did with Emmanuel was to say, we have a project, actually outside the city, and it's not one that has a real urgent time frame. We would like you to be the lead designer on that project. It gives him experience, it gives us experience with him, so that when an opportunity pops up, which tends to have certain urgency at the Navy Yard, we have developed both capacity and familiarity how to work with him. So those are just 2 examples. The other big approach was the idea of debundling, or unbundling, I guess is the word, more appropriate word. And this has been mentioned several times this evening in terms of people's testimony. And this is
also mentioned ad nauseum during hearings across government. So we really are at a place where we need department leadership to be intentional about how we fix that, because that opens up the field of opportunity for MBE, WBEs.
No question, and I don't mean to be, flippant, but all of this stuff has to be extremely intentional. I mean, if it's not really intentional, so it's tough work. Some of this is difficult work, right? And taking contracts and figuring out how to unbundle them to maximize the number of opportunities you can create. It takes a great close coordination between ownership and our general contractors. It takes a good knowledge of who's out there and what their capabilities are, because you don't want to unbundle it in a way that doesn't match up with what the capability is out there. So you really need to know who your supplier and your subcontractor network is. But we have found this to be a very successful approach. The worst thing for us, the worst thing for the individual companies that we're talking about, the minority-owned and female-owned companies, and frankly, for the whole concept of trying to enhance economic participation, is to push people to a point where they fail, or put them in a position where they don't, let me say it more positively. We have to put people in a position where they can succeed and grow. And the unbundling allows us to more closely marry what a minority or female or disabled firm might be able to do, both in scale and capability, with what we need. And this is really, I think, a very important strategy that we are implementing. We have been implementing it now for the last several years, and it's one which I think going forward is going to be very critical to the success of this
Council
initiative.
members are eager and looking with interest to see how we get to a better place when it comes to this word that we hear all the time around unbundling.
Just a comment on that, and I think particularly when you're thinking about construction, unbundling construction trades and subcontracts, I think one of the challenges, and we see this a little bit in our work on behalf of PAID, even at the Navy Yard, next to Liberty's work, is public procurement regulations create a significant impediment to that. And obviously you guys have heard about that a lot, and I think one of the things that's really impressive when you have a private partner who's so deeply committed to this concept is they have a lot more flexibility in how they procure contracts. And so Liberty Property and Centerra can decide, for instance, whether they want to waive a performance bond, where under public bidding, you're required to have that performance bond. That's going to limit the number of people that can bid on a certain size project, right? A Liberty and Centerra can work with a contractor to identify smaller bid packages where different trades might be subdivided into different contracts. And that might create a capacity opportunity for a set of minority or women-owned companies. Under public procurement, it's going to be very difficult to do a lot of that. And I think that's one of the issues, maybe as you think about the city's role in this as a purchaser, right, which is different than the role in terms of encouraging it in the private economy. But I think that's a significant restriction that when you hear about the efforts of someone like Liberty and Centerra, very different than, I would assume even, I don't know the airport's requirements, but I would assume as a public authority, they are bound by different sets of public requirements about how they can do that kind of unbundling.
Okay.
If I may just add to that, it really starts back at the design stage, because if there's a commitment to try and break it down, it's better formed on the design stage so that the bid packages can allow for that. Because if it happens at the tail end, you're having to reconstruct oftentimes the drawings. So it's really, and that's one of the things we like about our relationship with Liberty. They understand the value proposition of everyone having a sip in the water, being able to drink at the well. So that's sort of...
Well, that's why I raised the question about where is the chamber in this, because we know that the joint venture partnership between Liberty Property Trust and Centerra is unprecedented. It works, and it's novel. Why have we not been able to duplicate or replicate that model when it works, and it works, and it works, and it's a win-win for everybody? It's a rhetorical statement. That's why I raised the question about the chamber. If we can get more believers, like the leadership of Liberty Property Trust, to assist, be an equal partner in many ways with companies like Centerra, this discussion becomes less and less a pain to our ears. My homework tells me that this is PIDC, receives about $1 million from Commerce, either Commerce or the Office of Housing and Community Development. I looked at the budget just a little. What does that $1 million buy?
I think you're probably referring to the CDBG allocation?
Yes.
Yeah, so PIDC, I think, receives about $600,000 a year in revolved CDBG dollars that are part of the loan portfolio. That supports our cost to have our small business lending operation and our community investment program. So the 85 or so small businesses that we have 5 or 6 people out in the market who are finding those businesses, working with those businesses to submit applications. The underwriting team, we have 4 or 5 people underwriting business loans and project loans in our community investment portfolios. Those funds help bear the cost of that project, that program. Those kinds of loans are not self-sufficient. So when we make a loan, a contract line of credit to someone at 2 3/4% interest, and our cost of that funds is 2%, we're not going to make enough money on the loan to cover all the costs that go with it. So the CDBG investment supports small business lending, technical assistance, and our some of our community investment program.
And so those companies have to be aware of it to ask for it, or you make a leadership decision that these companies are worthy of the use of these dollars?
So the $600,000 of CDBG supports PIDC's cost and our cost to hire employees and have them in-house. We have a separate allocation that we use to actually lend dollars. Those are typically tend to be small community development projects.
Okay.
I've talked earlier about the restrictions around public resources. It's very hard to lend community development block grant money to a small business because of all the federal requirements that are going to get passed through the city to that recipient. And so we tend to bundle that money. We tend to support technical assistance with it. We support our costs. And then we support certain projects where we know that they're going to have to meet those requirements for other reasons. And so it's not an extra burden to invest those resources.
Thank you. Point of information amongst colleagues, there's a high school in the city that actually trains young people in the trades. Help me out, which is it?
Youth Bill?
Youth Bill.
Youth Bill. And so when we talk about the challenges that we face with the building trades, does it not make sense for Youth Bill to be a part of a scenario, a proposal, and a leverage point for the building trades when it comes to creating a pipeline of opportunity for young people?
The bigger that pipeline is at the front end, the more likely you're going to have success on the back end.
And Councilwoman, I would just follow up on that statement, which is very true. You see that with regard to the trades, but to put the challenge in terms of professional services into perspective, I think this year there are 101,000 registered architects in the United States. Less than 2% are African American of that number. And so this speaks to the fact that we have a large portion of our population that's not drawn to that profession or may not even know about it, or not be inspired to even consider it. This is why the work with, for instance, Chad is so important, because there is a whole industry here that we're not getting our people turned on to, right? And I think, frankly, we, all of us, Centera, Liberty, can be hopefully help inspire people to look at those related professional fields of design and engineering, right? And that ultimately, by having a greater participation rate, some of this problem will start to self-correct. Not all of it, but some of it will. But it's to that level of challenge that we have, right?
Yes, and it's quite discouraging to hear that, and not to be solved in this hearing, but it speaks deeper to STEM programs and relationships with School of Engineering like Penn State or Drexel, where you can sort of capture the imagination of these young people earlier, so you can hold their hand and walk them through programs that lead to real jobs in companies like your own.
Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, any more comments?
I think that's it. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Councilman Taubenberger, and we want to thank you all. Just want to note for the record that we have 2 more panels to get through. Councilman Taubenberger.
I have but one question, and that's to Mr. Grady. Mr. Grady, you had said that the procurement process is at the heart of some of this, public versus private. You did give an example of the performance bond, where it's, we need it on the government side, but on the private side it might not be necessary. What others could you mention, or are there others that are real impediments that possibly we could take a closer look at and changing, or we know how difficult it is?
Yeah, I think two come to mind around construction procurement specifically, so that's what we're talking about. And I heard some conversation earlier in the panels about best value procurement as opposed to low bid procurement, right? And so really being able to define what your decision-making points are around the award of a contract. We face some of that in our procurement on behalf of paid. When we're acquiring construction services, we're bound by the law to take the lowest responsive bidder. And we can't really, as long as someone meets certain goals, we can't say someone provides a better value. And so I think value pricing and value procurement is an area where there's opportunities. And then any kind of restrictions around how the design and construction packages are put together and how they're bid out for public procurement. As Bill Wilson mentioned, in the private sector, there's a lot of work now around design build construction. There's a lot of work around the procurement of those contractor services in the design process, and that allows for a lot more participation. Again, things that can be done in the private sector that are much more highly regulated in the public sector.
Councilman, if I may, just to follow up on John's comment, one example, because oftentimes we have lightly capitalized companies who are in the minority and female-owned companies who are in this space. One of the things that we've done in certain cases is provided for a 2-week payment period, which means that those companies have a shorter float or smaller amount of float that they have to finance, which may sound to majority companies to be inconsequential, but for those firms, it's actually quite a roadblock. It's a huge issue. It's something which we are spending some time on our various projects. John and I have talked about it. This ties into also financing, which PIDC may be able to provide to help those firms be sufficiently capitalized to be successful.
This committee, I think, is familiar with our contract line of credit program. We've heard some testimony in the past about that. That was created specifically because government is a slow pay. And, I can't tell you the number of small minority women-owned contractors we've worked with who have to step back from public procurement because the margins that they can earn are less than what they can earn in private industry, solely on the issue of cost of capital. If you think about if it's going to take 30 or 60 days for someone to get paid, and they're going to put that on their credit card, a lot of firms will, at 19% interest, that's eating up capital that could get reinvested back into the business. And I think that's an excellent suggestion, and something we work very specifically with a lot of different departments in the city around helping to build greater participation by providing that kind of liquidity to the contractors.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Sure. Councilman Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple questions before we get on to the next panel. John, you mentioned that 36% of loans through PIDC went to minority and women-owned businesses last year, and 36% went to MBEs.
Correct.
20% went to WBEs. And just for the record, for members of council, just provide us those numbers specifically, and these are the companies, so we can break down, okay?
Oh, sure. Provide you with a list of
African-American women, and these are success stories, if these are the numbers that we're hitting, but we want to have an actual snapshot of the picture of who's actually receiving.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, we'll submit that to the chair.
That would be helpful. And then also, my staff had brought it to my attention early on that, the mayor kicked off his administration signing executive order number 3-12 that states that the Office of Economic Opportunity may enter into cooperative agreements with quasi-public agencies to help them establish MWDSBE programs. And so, give me an idea of the work that you're going to be working on with Ms. Harper to make sure that we are advancing Mayor Jim Kenney's goal of diversity and inclusion here in the city of Philadelphia.
Sure.
And then last, for Liberty Property Trust, if you can give me an idea and an overview, and you also are leaving out some information that was mentioned inside, at the table when we discussed some of these issues regarding having your oversight committees, looking at different projects that you're developing on that specifically deals with diversity and inclusion. So you brought Urban Affairs Coalition to the table, you brought Michael Bowman to the table, you brought Rittenhouse to the table. I want to know specifically, you talked about a strategic plan that's either being put together or you're working on, but I would like to still see the numbers officially saying, here's what we have accomplished, here's our strategic plan, what we're going to be doing moving forward. And so that's just a 3-point question, one for Liberty and the first 2 for you, John.
Sure. Yeah, and we will submit a list of all of our loans from last year to the chair so that you have that.
And you and Ms. Harper and the mayor's executive administrator, like how does that play a role into PIDC and the mayor's executive order?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my testimony, I mean, we've been longtime partners with OEO, and that, I think, comes through in a couple of ways. One is we work very closely with the entire team there and in Commerce on helping to develop resources to support minority and small businesses, minority and women-owned businesses. Contract line of credit is a perfect example of a program that we developed. We went out and raised capital for in the private market, and we've, as I said, we've provided capital to probably 30 businesses last year, millions of dollars in liquidity to those businesses so that they can continue to grow their wealth. The second area, I think, with OEO is, and again, you heard a little bit in the previous panels, making sure we promote opportunity as much as we can. And I think OEO has done a great job of convening groups, whether it's the airport, whether it's with contractors, whether it's during Med Week when there's a particular focus, but being part of that regular promotion and discussion about where there are opportunities for businesses in the city. And then lastly, we will continue to work directly with OEO and their team to set goals for every contract that we enter into around construction at the Navy Yard, around our public sector obligations there, and continuing to work with them in our own procurement methods at PIDC.
So like beyond the Navy Yard, and I don't know if most folks may or may not know, on most of the major development projects here in the city of Philadelphia, PIDC play a role at the end of the day. Most of the commercial development or industrial, y'all are at the table.
Right.
And so just making sure we continue, like I know we just did Penn Innovation Center, right? So I'm working with Penn, looking at their numbers, making sure as they go through the development and finishing up that project, and as they look across the street, diverse, it's inclusive, and making sure that everybody have a chance to participate. But y'all play a major role in extending the capital that will allow other individuals to say, you know what, this is going to be a good investment if PIDC can match with those public dollars that are provided.
And I think a big part of that going forward is, as a number of folks have mentioned, the more we build success and the deeper that pool of firms are that are in the market, that are doing the work, and that are showing that they can do the work, the more people are going to do this. And the marketplace will continue to adopt more of these practices. We have to be vigilant, we have to set goals, we have to work with them, but we also have to continue to develop the resources on the back end to make sure we can fill those opportunities.
Okay. So, thank you.
Were you about to respond, sir?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilman, I do have, anticipating your question, we did bring the information for you, and we'll submit it as we...
Can somebody give members of the committee
Yes.
around? Thank you very much, John.
Thank you. Listen, we want to thank you all
Thanks.
To say to panels 4 and 5, thank you too for your patience. I mean, we've been, watching the clock and thinking about your testimony, extremely valuable. But if there are no more questions, we'll conclude with this panel, and we'll ask the clerk to please call up the next panel.
A. Bruce Crawley, Anthony Fullard, Hanford Jones.
We have one more panel after this, and when you get to the table, we'll just ask you to state your name and firm for the record.
Good afternoon. I'll begin with a brief testimony. Anthony Fullard is with me. He's available for comment on what we're presenting, and then we'll hear from Hanford. First of all, with projected new business opportunities that are expected to result from the upcoming expansions at the Philadelphia Navy Yard and the Philadelphia International Airport, we wanted an opportunity to present testimony on the critically important issue of RFP contract unbundling as relates to government supplier diversity programs. We'll begin by establishing an updated demographic and business ownership profile for our city. It's important to recognize that according to the Census Bureau, African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians do constitute about 64% of the city's population. That non-Hispanic whites comprise 36.9%, and that all females are estimated at 52.7%. We should also know that the city's nearly 105,000 firms, about 27,000 of which have actual employees, 26,292 are owned by African Americans, 11,659 owned by Hispanics, 11,531 owned by Asians, and 40,900 are female-owned. And in the city's construction industry, which takes a special focus during these times, there are 7,610 construction-related firms, 19.8% of which are owned by African Americans, 14.1% by Hispanics, 6.4% by Asians, and 7.3% by females. On the basis of overall gross receipt comparisons, however, businesses owned by females generate $4.6 billion annually. Those owned by Asians generate $2.7 billion. Those owned by African Americans generate $1.2 billion. Hispanic firms about $706 million, and firms owned by white males generate $33 billion in public and private sector receipts, according to the Census Bureau. At the outset, we also want to define unbundling as the separation of the components of large contracts to make them and contract opportunities as a whole more suitable for small and minority business participation as prime contractors. Among many in the minority business community, it has long been believed that those who have had the responsibility to structure the content and size of government RFP packages have been made fully aware of the capacity of potential minority participants prior to establishing the bid criteria and minimum sizes for their projects. Minority business owners realize that those same RFP designers know full well that African American, Hispanic, Asian, and some female firms have been historically smaller than most mainstream businesses due to an ongoing pattern of denied access to contract participation and to financing vehicles. With that full knowledge of the minority business landscape, project owners and construction managers have designed bid packages whose sizes have, in many cases, been intentionally established to be beyond the staffing, bonding, and financing capacity of minority firms. As they become aware, for example, that the vast majority of minority firms in the market might reasonably be able to bid as a prime contractor on a $10 million RFP package, they arbitrarily establish the minimum size of the project at $20 million. Such a practice here and in other jurisdictions across the country enables city officials and construction managers to shrug their shoulders in false disappointment when the volume of minority bidders is extremely low or non-existent. They feign surprise when few, if any, minority firms participate in the bid process. If you have listened closely, you too may have heard them express their confusion about what could possibly be done to generate interest on the part of minority bidders. If this is beginning to sound conspiratorial, it's because it appears to be very much the case. This is certainly not a new issue for Philadelphia's minority contracting programs, but it does clearly represent an item of unfinished business. Our track record for not taking timely action on this issue to the city's own economic detriment is troubling and counterproductive. Why is unbundling so important for the city of Philadelphia and for potential small minority and female contractors? There are numerous reasons. Among them are, number one, prime contractors' share and control of an overall project and its revenues are by definition significantly larger than the subcontractor share. Number two, with greater revenue potential than for subs, the prime contractor is better positioned to accumulate an operating surplus, which facilitates growth of the firm, expansion of its facilities, greater levels of job creation, and more competitive salaries for the firm's employees. Number three, at the same time, the subcontractor has no legal standing with the client. Who wants to be the subcontractor? And generally has little access, if any, to key client decision makers. Subcontractors are subject to the prime's business protocol and philosophy, regardless of their own expertise or experience. And five, subcontractors are also vulnerable to the prime contractor's payment practices, no matter how slow or irresponsible. In theory, for these and other reasons, the conversion of minority and female subcontractors to prime contractor status has been a top priority for the city's minority business agenda over several decades. In attempting to address this issue, while we were leading Philadelphia's African American Chamber of Commerce, Anthony Fullard and I persuaded the city's procurement officers to unbundle what had been a series of demolition construction projects that had been set at 100-unit minimum packages, and to convert them to 10-unit packages to better accommodate the capacity of small, Black, Hispanic, Asian, and female contractors who had graduated from our Emerging Contractors program and who were interested in bidding as primes. That unbundling led to graduate minority contractors being able to bid successfully as primes for the very first time. They successfully completed 76 demolition properties representing $2.3 million in contract revenues and employing 65 predominantly minority workers. 5 of the graduates moved on to participate in the city's mainstream procurement bid program, aggregating an additional $5.9 million in contracts. Inexplicably, however, in 2004, the city discontinued the unbundled demolition contract bid packages, forcing our graduates to return to subcontractor status or to close their businesses. We did, however, prove emphatically that unbundling as a means to create prime minority contractors and to generate new jobs and economic opportunity really does work. Other jurisdictions also clearly understand just how important unbundling initiatives can be for their own business communities. Indeed, in a 2007 survey of minority and non-minority owned firms by the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority, both minorities, 42.9%, and female firms, at 40.4%, responded that the sizes of RFP-related projects were generally too large and that those sizes represented a clear disincentive to their bids. By contrast, only 19.4% of male non-minority firms said that existing project sizes constituted an impediment for them. Interestingly, the Cleveland Airport System in 2013 said it would, wherever feasible, unbundle projects or separate large contracts, which it considered suitable for small business participation. The airport committed to conduct contract reviews on each FAA-assisted contract to determine whether portions could be unbundled. It also pledged to encourage its prime contractors to unbundle their own subcontracts. Similar actions have been taken by the New York State Assembly and by the City of Houston, Texas, and have also been supported by American Express Open as part of its 2011 Victory on Procurement survey. In the executive summary for that report, Amex said the post-Great Recession bundling of contracts may be providing fewer prime contracting opportunities to small businesses, and that if such trends continue, they, quote, could spell trouble for government small business contracting goals and programs. Closer to home, in his 2007 audit of Philadelphia's Minority Business Economic Council, City Controller Alan Buckovich strongly recommended the adoption of a municipal policy to ensure that city departments will begin to make special efforts to unbundle contracts and to increase minority and female bidders as prime contractors in Philadelphia. In addition, in a survey of MBEC certified businesses that accompanied the report, 45.1% of respondents reported that the failure to unbundle contracts represented the single most significant impediment to their ability to win a Philadelphia contract. Unbundling in these survey responses outranked all other impediments, including insufficient financing vehicles, inadequate access to bonding and insurance, and even the excessive granting of prime contractor waivers by MBEC. All of these discussions notwithstanding, there's not been significant progress in addressing the unbundling issue for Philadelphia's minority contracts to date. This should be alarming to us with the Navy Yard and airport contracts on the horizon. According to the OEO's 2016 disparity report, for example, while white females participated as primes in 165 city contract opportunities, black male-owned firms participated in just 115. Hispanic males were included as primes in only 31 contracts, and Asian males in 23. Curiously, as well as white female firms has done as prime contractor participants, the phenomenon seems not to have been extended to firms headed by black, Hispanic, and Asian females, who have participated in just 25, 6, and 7 prime contracts, respectively, over fiscal year 2015. These issues aside, there's another overarching reason for us to focus on the effective utilization of unbundling in Philadelphia's small minority business efforts. Following the termination of the city's minority business certification program in 2010, the percentage and number of out-of-city, out-of-region, national minority firms in the new OEO registry increased immediately and dramatically from an average of 337 such national firms over the 3 years from 2008 to 2010 to 580 national out-of-city, out-of-region firms in 2011, the year immediately following the certification program's termination. I trust that you are as concerned as we are that such firms are counted at an astounding 863 in 2016, and that's up from 377 in 2008, 9, and 10. While all of this has been going on, the percentage of Philadelphia-based firms in the OEO registry has declined shamefully from 40.6% in 2008 to 33% in 2016. Now fully 66% of minority and female businesses in that registry are not, in fact, Philadelphia businesses. Perhaps that also explains why the city's regional but not Philadelphia minority contracts grew from $39.7 million in 2014 to $50 million in 2015. This is clearly not the direction we should want to choose to attract more city-based minority and female contractors to the municipal procurement process. With systematic commitment to unbundling and more reasonable contract sizes, perhaps local minority firms will finally be able to compete with businesses based in New Jersey, Maryland, New York, Virginia, California, Florida, Texas, and North Carolina, all of whom are listed in the OEO database registry. We should be able to do better than this. We should support our own local minority and female businesses because as they grow to prime contractor status, they can become even more effective at generating economic benefits and jobs for Philadelphia rather than for San Francisco. These kinds of circumstances certainly play no small role in Philadelphia's perennial ranking as the most poverty-stricken large city in America. Unbundling, it seems, is an important step in improving Philadelphia's economic reality and its global business development brand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley, for your testimony. Hanford, thank you, and Anthony for being here. One, let me just state for the record, I want to thank Councilman Johnson for agreeing to chair the hearing in my absence. I'm only out of here because of driveway and retaining wall meeting with Ellen 9. Only a driveway and retaining wall issue could get me to leave out of this hearing. But I needed to state for the record before I left that this language, the concept of unbundling, the concept of making opportunity smaller so that members of the minority, disadvantaged, and women communities who are business owners can have access is a pretty new language for some folks to start speaking. And I just needed to say for the record that when I started as an intern in this building, Bruce Crawley was talking about the unbundling of contracts. So Bruce, I didn't mean to have people questioning if he was here and he was talking about the unbundling of contracts when she was an intern and now she's a member. I just say that because I want folks to know the level of consistency associated with your advocacy. So as we move forward to talk about this issue and we talk about rebuild and we talk about the PLA, I think back to Neighborhood Transformation Initiative when Councilman, for the first time. Those sort of 10 parcel demolition projects that you just referred to, we saw that taking place in the Logan community of the 9th Councilmanic District. So we'll be calling on you. You've been our authority and our expert. I did want to recognize the presence of Councilman Green, who is with us, and Councilman Johnson. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Will the clerk please call the next panelist?
Any questions?
Oh, question. No, Hanford first and then questions.
That works.
Thank you, Councilman Johnson and all other honorable co-sponsors of this bill, inclusive of Green, Brown, Bass, Greenlee, O. Jones, President Clark, Tauberger, Dom Barker, Jim, Ms. Sanchez, Blackwell, Henson, Sequila, and O'Neill. Remember, I think I heard the most important thing today, and that is how these things are written. This city council has an ordinance that requires Republican council people, because the reality of without that extra written effort, you wouldn't have no Republicans. Numerically, they're not there to win. It's the same thing in the black business community. When the Miami Metro-Dade County had the influx of folks from Cuba in the 70s and 80s, UMTA at that time, now it's Federal Transit Administration, allowed, and it's still allowable, for a recipient of federal funds to create bid language representative to achieve what they're trying to achieve at their recipient level. Metropolitan-Dade County, Florida was allowed to use black goals on federally assisted contracts because the numbers of minority Cubans coming in with the existing minority Hispanics ran black business people damn near into a genocide of life and annual gross receipts. So that program worked for 4 or 5 years, got sued, and the lawyers didn't want to fight it like they could have and won. I'm suggesting here the same thing, and I'm off text. We should have an economic emergency contract opportunity bid schedules. Because without it, how am I going to bid against Tony DePaul or Haynes and Cuba House? They got all the aggregate materials to make asphalt concrete. I can't bid against them and win. Oh yeah, I can bid against them, but not win. Because I don't have no aggregate pits for the making of concrete or asphalt. I can't win. So that's how you're going to make overnight black contractors in particular, and other black business owners and minorities and women, prime contractors, use the term emergency economic opportunities. Because outside of that, I've been here since the 90s. The numbers of black business people as prime contractors is nothing to laugh at, and it can be achieved. The Marriott Hotel on Market Street, we wrote, I was at NBC at the time, in there that you had to have an equity MBE partner. Mr. Wilson, who just left, was that partner. We had the same requirement at the airport, Marriott. It wasn't achieved, and the contract was still awarded. There have been 3 or 4 other contracts where we had equity requirements of ownership. The airport PHL master concessionaire had Marketplace and a black guy right down the street at the Redwood Advisory. After 20-some years, they had fallen out. This honorable council and past mayor allowed Marketplace to keep the contract without having a black or minority or woman equity partner. All the Redwood Advisory's workers were put into Marketplace's administrative team, and that was it. The black goal that was achieved 20 years prior was ignored, and Marketplace was allowed to keep walking without his equity ownership partner. When Katrina went down, President Bush changed the rules, negated the prevailing wage rates, and had a whole bunch of people coming in there to clean up Katrina after effects without making good minimum wage rates. So I'm suggesting what you've heard earlier, change the bid language with the stroke of your pens. This city did have a black goal on bids. This very city council had a goal to bid, had a black goal out for bid. It was bidded twice. It wasn't successful. I guess I didn't do my job well enough to get out-of-state firms or local firms with big bonding ability. Most of them would have been graduated SBA AA firms. to come in and bid. However, I did bring a black architect from California when we were doing Terminal A over here to compete. He did a part of LAX. But if you've got 20 design contracts and I've got 10, and I'm on the selection committee, who's going to get higher points? The man with 10 or the person with 20? So our selection criteria scale has to be adjusted to accommodate the fact that, hell, 40 years ago when that firm had 20 contracts, we may not have been able to have a business. So I've only been in business 10 years and got 10 contracts. There should be some weight evaluation in favor of that black or minority or woman firm when they're competing against a larger firm. And finally, the pre-qualification. Councilwoman Brown made a great effort requiring people to have women on their boards. We heard all that great stuff from Mr. Gattuso, and I was waiting for one of y'all to ask how many blacks were on their board. I think it's something that we must really look at, and that is when people pre-qualify in this city, there needs to be questions on the pre-qualification form, making them identify 5 or 10 of their largest private projects and the blacks and minorities that worked on those projects. If they can't show you none, they shouldn't do business with this city. It's that simple. Just like you got Republicans, it's written into the law. They gotta win. We should write into our specs, we gotta win.
Thank you, Mr. Hanford. Councilwoman Blandos Reynolds Brown.
Well, you've certainly given us some more homework to do. And that's a good thing. Bruce Crawley, I want to thank you for drilling down why debundling. And now having heard Councilwoman Parker say that as an intern, there were conversations about this. For me, I'm at a place now, and I've already had a conversation with my staff. This is a must-do item for us if we are serious about opening up opportunity for MBE, WBEs. And we've heard from the Commerce Department and their beginning efforts to look at this. We've heard from PIDC. So we're smart enough to figure it out. And when I learned here today that it starts with procurement and on the design, at the design stage, we also have been given cues as to where we need to look to make debundling a must-do, mandatory. It's clear to me that that's the next place of where we need to go. That's it for me.
I just think that when you hear people say good faith effort, they think, and we've allowed them to think that begins when they're looking for people against the requirements of the RFP. No, it starts before that, because by the time the RFP is structured, they probably, I don't want to be too cynical, but sometimes people have been accused of already having recipients for the bid package in mind when they write the RFP, and that happens sometimes. But the real sinister part of it is knowing what the availability in the marketplace is. If you say you're going to have a 10%, a 15%, or 20% goal for women, African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians, but you have not explored what the availability of those skill sets and those professional skill sets are in your marketplace among those minority communities, then you haven't done your homework, and that is not a good faith effort. You're putting it, I've heard large contractors say, we'll agree to anything. There's no enforcement, there's no compliance, and we know precisely whether you can find, number one, the availability of firms that can do this work, and once you find the firms, do those firms have the capacity? Do they have the staffing? Do they have access to financing and bonding? Can they do the work? And if they know that they can't, they know they are a good faith effort waiting to happen. So we need to put pressure on people to understand that the design of those RFP packages is where the real marginalization takes place before all this other stuff happens.
May I say one thing? MBEC, when Kurt Jones was the director and I had just come from Baltimore, Maryland, running the Maryland United Contract Association, we got memorandum of understandings with GSA to make an 8A contract award on Mr. Hicken at that Veterans Place. Mr. Al Brown from Alpha Office did all the furniture in there under the 8A program. Not a city down in the project. But because of the proactiveness of Mr. Jones's office, we were able to do the same thing with the Federal Bureau of Prisons. For the prison, the Federal Detention Center on Arch Street, the Temple Group was a construction management firm. Through the same way we got the GSA Furniture Award for Alpha Office under the 8A program. Maybe we may want to take some federal projects and go to that federal agency and say, hey, let us be allowed to do 8A set-aside work straight up on that contract in our city. There are ways to write it in. And I hate to say it, since Roots is on right now, somebody wrote we were slaves, and somebody unwrote that we weren't anymore. That simple. It took 300 years of tears and blood and sweat to have that simple hand, simple pen, free us. And please take that same power and free us again.
Thank you, Mr. Hanford Jones.
Go ahead.
Councilman Green.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson. I want to thank the panel for their commentary and for the years of work in the vineyard regarding this issue. We talked about unbundling, and when we talked about the rebuild and the capital programs in the city of Philadelphia, I made an analogy in reference to the cake. I won't go back through the whole analogy I made about how the cake gets done, but that's really the main issue, is that when we're going through a change in the procurement process here in the city of Philadelphia and we have a bifurcated procurement system, my concern is, especially on the professional services side, is that we don't have the advocacy in the room when decisions are being made, when the concept of drafting RFP is being done and having the advocacy at that level. When it comes to council, decisions are already made. The question is when the thought is being put together about how a project is going to be done, that's where advocacy needs to occur. And that's something that I've been advocating for. I've talked about it in detail during our procurement hearings. But the question I have for the panel is that when you talk about unbundling, you talked about what you've seen in other jurisdictions, and often what I've seen when we have these discussions is that because time is of the essence, and we don't have time to break things down at a smaller level because we've got to get through this project because everyday dollars are being lost. And I'm curious from your experience and maybe talking and some of the research you've done in other jurisdictions, what's been the way of pushing back when people say, well, we got this major initiative and we've got to get this initiative done, and if we don't get it done now, then we're going to lose the opportunity. And so as a result, because of the time pressure, people say, well, we can't unbundle, we can't do this, we can't do that. And as a result, we get put in the same place over and over and over again, from the stadium projects to the convention center expansion. Is always, we've got to get it done now, and it becomes these one-off type initiatives. So how can we, so I'm curious from your observations in other jurisdictions, what steps have been taken? I mean, I have some thoughts, as I said in previous hearings, that we need to have a Maynard moment in the city of Philadelphia, but I'm curious for the thoughts of the panel.
I think that if you begin these processes by accepting the responsibility that each of the contracts that get let by the city have to have fiscal credibility for the purposes of the people who have balance sheets and income statements and are trying to do a project in a cost-effective way for the city and for themselves. That's one thing. But if you're a city government, you also have an economic development mission. And the people who are doing business with you have to understand that if the economic development perspective is not properly vetted and done, then it doesn't matter. You can't allow them to say to you, well, we've got to get this done or else we're going to lose $5,000. If we don't get this done, we may lose 500 jobs. We may send those jobs to California. We may send those jobs to North Carolina. Let's make sure that the economic development agenda for each of the contracts let through city government, through state government. I hate to to mention names, but I remember clearly, to give you a big example of how this can work against us. Years ago, when Ed Rendell was governor, he moved to bundle a lot of state contracts. And because he said that if he bundled those contracts and moved those contracts up to larger bidders, then the state would save money in its budget, on its fiscal budget, on a year in and year out basis. They might save $250,000, $300,000 a year. But they closed down in the process a number of state-based corporations and businesses that normally got those contracts, because those contracts then went to San Diego, they went to North Carolina, South Carolina, because they were trying to save $150,000 and were oblivious to the economic impact of that cost saving. Net, at the end of the day, the economic development value is probably more than that simple fiscal value that was saved by that move. And that was a big problem, and I think the state is still trying to come to grips with that having been done. We don't want to do that in Philadelphia. And that's the logic that you should probably use when you're talking to people who try to prioritize the short-term driver of every day I'm losing $5,000. That can't be the issue.
And just a follow-up, so in some of the jurisdictions you talked about in your testimony, were they willing to not move forward with a project if certain goals were not accomplished? Because I think, and because I started my career as a banker, sometimes you can decide to do a loan and decide not to do a loan. So you can decide to do a project or not do a project. And sometimes when you take certain actions, that sends a message to certain industries that things are different than they've been done in the past. So I'm curious, in your conversation, research, other jurisdictions, have there been major initiatives where they decided that because the initial response from certain communities was not inclusive, we decided we're going to put this on hold to maybe give you some opportunity to rethink how you want to move forward with this initiative?
Yeah, well, Councilman, I started my career as a banker too. And we used to talk in the commercial lending area of the bank that there were two ways to look at every loan package. You can look at it to turn it down, and you can look at it to find ways to approve it. Every single loan that comes through. I was in commercial credit as a junior credit officer doing analysis. You remember those days? Commercial credit analysis. You looked and you remembered all the things that they taught you in credit training, and you analyzed it according to that, and then you took it to your senior officer and said, if I were you, I wouldn't make this loan. And they said, that's nice, young man, but we're going to make this deal because that's a friend of the bank.
Bert Lance.
And that's how loans get made. That's how business is done. And we're not talking about doing anything that's irresponsible, but we've got to realize that people are trying not to make a contract sometimes when they ought to be encouraged to make a contract, when there is not as much risk as they want you to believe there is in having done this the appropriate way. So be cognizant of that.
You guys had asked about BRTs. There was an MBE person at the BRT maybe 3 years ago. I don't know if she's still there. She was at NBC, she went to the airport, and then they gave her a post at BRT. That was that good. I've been out 7 years now. I can't believe it's that long. So it was maybe almost 10 years ago now that BRT did have an MBE person. And finally, Dietz and Watson and Tudor Perini checked their EOP plans. They said, the heck with y'all. We ain't gonna have no MBE participation at the design level. Those are two projects going on right this second. Dietz and Watson's just trying to get their employee parking lot finished. They disregarded A&E, and it was in the bill passed by this very council in their EOP plan, along with Tudor Perini in the project, which way am I sitting? Right down the hallway on Market Street. Both of those two projects did not have an EEO component to include blacks and minorities in the design portion. The Dietz family, like, it's our family thing, we're gonna do it this way, and the council let it go. All right, sorry, please, excuse me.
Of course, when we get up, Mike ain't gonna work.
You know what you say?
Mike been working all them people that's been up there.
I go to Annapolis when I'm in my association. barely get gas to get there. I mean, you'd be surprised when you hear it correctly.
Oh, have mercy. It's by design, Councilman.
This light one's on. Oh, it didn't work. It's on a lunch break.
Councilwoman Blondo Reynolds Brown.
Thank you for at least mentioning the interest and the progress we've made around women on boards. But just as a matter of information, you should know that there was a developer that came before this body wanting to build a new hotel in my comrade's district here, wherein now in those documents is the question, and what is the composition of your board? And you should know in that particular entrance, in that particular matter, there were no women and no people of color. So where do you think that bill went? It stayed in committee, it went nowhere. So I cite that as an example that we are sensitive to that, we pay attention to that, and it is a new day when it comes to women being in places of responsibility and leadership. So that's one instance where that new law made a difference, and Councilman Kenyatta Johnson had absolutely no problem at all with it remaining in committee.
Thank you. Mr. Farrar, do you have a comment?
Yeah. I'm just. This has been an old conversation for many years, and for it to just hit the floor again, I thank our leadership for that. But unbundling, again, has been an old word. I think that. Let me just start by saying that. By looking in the audience behind me, there was a time that when you would have hearings that was specifically to help to enhance the opportunity for minorities firms in this city, it will be jam-packed in here. You would have minority firms that would want to hear what was happening for them. Well, you can look behind me and see what's happening for them. There's a lot of firms that are disenchanted.
Franchise.
Discouraged about the process. And this is why a lot of them don't even come down here anymore. They don't show up. They don't want to be involved into the whole certification process, because I think I heard someone say that if you wanted it to be certified at OEO, it takes about 30 days. That's untrue. And then they don't see what the advantage is for them to be certified, because it definitely does not drive business their way. So I think that you need to look in your audience and where all your minority businesses at on this topic. Secondly, is that as Bruce has said, and to your point, Councilman Green, is that we did a unbundling project when we were doing the NTI program, and we had to work with the city. It was something that they did not want to do. It was something that we uncovered of what they were doing, and it was systematically shutting minority firms out throughout the whole city. And so we had to work with, at that time, Hill International, who was the construction management firm and who was the city's rep. And we had to sit down with them and we had to show them of how they could unbundle those demolition, packages to a smaller packages, so that the city can still economically benefit, because you would have more people bidding on those contracts. And also what it also entailed, it helped to bring the unit cost of each of those projects down to a lesser unit price. So and so we captured all of that data, and we showed the city of how they could benefit from it. But we didn't stop there. We also showed, to Bruce's point, again, of when you get more firms involved in to these projects like that, we also track how many employees worked, how successful each of the firms were, okay, because we also was administering at that time, we did a loan pool, and so we also measured of how successful those firms were and how they systematically grew as a firm. So the city and TEL benefit as a whole. They had a firm that was growing, they had a firm that was employing local people, and they had people that was paying taxes. And so,
shared the financing model with PIDC.
and we shared that same financing part. Well, that's where it came from, the financing model, because PIDC at that time was one of the participants. They didn't run the program. They was a participant in the program with another, I think we had another 9 banks with us at the same time. But the point to the unbundling, it worked. It helped to grow local firms. It helped to employ local people that lived in the city, but it also helped to increase the city's tax base. And so, you know, the direction that you are headed is a very good direction, but it is long overdue, and it needs to be done immediately. But it also needs to be tracked, and it also needs to make sure that it has enforcement arm behind it. Because if you don't have the tracking mechanism, and if you don't have the enforcement, then you're really wasting your time.
Thank you. So, I want to go back to just one or two things before we call up the last panel. One, I want to thank Mr. Crawley for the very, very thorough and informative testimony, specifically on the issue of debundling contracts. And I didn't have a chance to read the testimony prior to today, and I thought it was going to be geared toward just strictly diversity and inclusion. But this is a very, very specific, as Councilwoman Blondell-Brown like to say, laser-focused issue. Separate from everything else, very, very specific. And it's been a part of this it's been a topic in this council chambers over the last several months for a variety of different reasons, based upon some things we have done here, which will result in a $500 million bond that will be floated to do some construction projects throughout the city of Philadelphia. So I'm quite sure that this won't be the last time you'll hear this conversation. This won't be the last time that we will be looking at how do we specifically address it.
Councilman, let me also make sure we all understand that the concept of unbundling relates to professional services too.
We know, we're clear, we very clear.
Not just a construction term.
We are very clear.
There are a lot of professional service providers
to be quite frank,
bundled out of bids.
Yes.
Right.
Very clear on that. And, you know, I always try to tell people, I got friends who are lawyers too. I got friends who are architects. I got friends who can do the bond work separate from guys who want to do construction or be a plumber or be an electrician. So we're going to take all of the information in consideration, as well as the comments and the testimony from Mr. Fullard, as well as Mr. Hanford Jones, who we've been receiving emails on a day-to-day basis. I do read the emails as it relates to the specific things that we need to pay attention to. And so going to my second term in council and through my lifetime of being a council person, this will be a part of my specific agenda. I can't speak for what happened in the past, but I know what my heart and passion is focused on, and also working in partnership with my colleagues, and specifically Councilwoman Blondell-Brown, who's been in the vineyard working on this issue. But I also want to make sure that we're doing an enforcement piece. When you talk about when a corporation or developer say we're not going to move forward, okay, if you come to me and say we got a timer, because I've been there before. I mean, I don't want to put people on the spot, but I can name the projects in the second councilmanic district where we've gotten the same approach. Oh, we don't get the zoning ordinance through, we can't, okay. Where's the plan first on the EOP side? And then we work, because at the end of the day, it's a public benefit, and it benefits everybody. And there's so much construction going on right now in the city of Philadelphia, it's like a no-brainer to make sure everybody have a chance to participate. So we thank all of you for being here. We're going to call up our next panel for the end of the day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Darrell Choates, Wayne Rockman, and Della Clark.
Shut it down. There. This one. Good.
I'm,
Please state your name for the record.
my name is Wayne Rockman. I'm representing Darrell Schoach. My comments is going to be brief because I believe Bruce Crawley did a fantastic job. And I represent, as you can see, chasing down contracts for Schultz Construction. And just to give you a brief background, I'm not going to hold it too long, but I've been in street politics since '75 here in Philadelphia, and I've helped put a lot of people in and take a lot of people out. I moved to Atlanta and I started working with President Carter and Clinton and Gore campaign down there, and I helped with a lot of development in Carter, in the southeast section, probably all over Atlanta. Then I got more involved in the process of contracts, and they called me the Philly Connection. Everybody came from Philly, came down there when the World Olympics was happening. So I was there when Maynard and all of them were saying 50% if you're going to operate here in Atlanta. I was there at the table, me, my little self, so I helped a lot of Philly people get involved in a lot of contracts, even water ice. We had water ice stands all over the Olympics. We had painting contracts. So it wasn't a real serious thing because council was on board, the mayor was on board, and it was a feeling of togetherness down there. It's a little bit more complex in Philadelphia. Coming back here, working with Schultz Construction and coming out of politics for a minute and getting involved, I found that there were a lot of information that wasn't presented to us in a very good fashion, especially when it comes to airport meetings. We went down to a lot of airport meetings, and the primes was all in there, and we the little people, we in the back, and we were waiting on to get called because we were previously told that if you come down here, we're going to line you up with primes. Once we discuss and the decision of how we're going to lay this thing out down here, you're going to be inclusive of this. But there was no follow-up program. Also, there wasn't any, the contracts were so conflicting, it all pointed up to prime. We didn't see ourselves actually fitting in there. We looked at the contracts, we said, well, how do we get in here? So they said, well, we're going to have meetings set up for smaller, companies. That never happened. Every time we had a meeting down at the airport, it was always prime people. And they set up front, and they got all the, but the information was open to everybody. We had a lot of food. We ate a lot down there. But there was no follow-up. There was no open process, as Bruce was saying, for us to be involved. The other thing is PIDC. I like what they did at the airport. I'm an ex-military man, Vietnam vet era, but there again, we went to them because we had other projects around the city and we needed funding, and we went through the process at Enterprise, the bonding and all that. We had everything. They refused to give us money. So for whatever reason, I don't know, we kept asking, well, when is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? And they sent us to a bank. The bank never approved us. So it's kind of bewildered, you come back to a town that you really love. I mean, really, you really love Philadelphia. I came back here really to start working with Kenny Gamble. That's why I came back, because I had enough of everything here for a minute. So Kenny said, come on back, man, we're going to build this neighborhood up. I said, okay, so I came back. So now I'm getting involved in this other ventures of construction. So now I'm hitting these brick walls, you know, and it was just a round robin with PIDC. I mean, I like what they did with the Navy base. I was stationed down there when I came home. You know, I was in and out of the Navy base. I like they went down there and broke it all down. But, you know, they had a woman named Marla Hamilton. She spun this around like a top every time we went to talk with her. We're going to help you. We're going to assist you. So there should be some follow-up with them as well. How do you assist? What track record do you have assisting minority contractors? And that's basically, I'm not going to hold you guys up. You guys been here all day, man.
Thank you, Wayne.
Yeah, that's it. All right.
The hearing on the resolution will now recess to the call of the chair. This concludes the business of the Committee on Economic Development and Commerce. Thank you very much, and thank everybody for their participation. Take care.